지금부터 25년 농정원 글로벌 트렌드 포럼을 시작하겠습니다. 안녕하십니까. 오늘 사회를 맡은 농정원 전문예실의 김상우 실장입니다. 반갑습니다. 바쁘신 와중에도 2025년 농정원 글로벌 트렌드 포럼에 참석해주신 매회분들께 감사드립니다. 오늘 포럼에서는 아일랜드의 전문가를 모시고 글로벌 농업 동향과 지속가능한 농식품 전략을 논의할 예정입니다. 본격적인 진행에 앞서 참석해주신 내외 기분을 소개하도록 하겠습니다.
네?
당초에는 주한 아일랜드 대사님이 참석할 예정이셨는데 오늘 급한 일정이 생기셨습니다. 그래서 오늘은 대사님을 대신하여 존 히긴스 농무 참사관님께서 참석하셨습니다. 참석자 인사하겠습니다. 예. 잠깐만요. 존 히긴스 농무관님 참석하셨습니다. 도널드 콜만 FA 축산소위원회 의장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 정용호 농림축산식품부 국제협력관님 참석해 주셨습니다. 사단법인 스마트 치유산업포럼 김창길 원장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 서진교 GSNJ 인스티튜트 원장님 참석해 주셨습니다. 윤지연 서울대 교수님 참석해 주셨습니다. 끝으로 오늘 포럼을 주최하시는 윤동진 농정원 원장님이십니다.
고맙습니다.
이외에도 오늘 행사에 참석해 주신 귀빈이 많이 계시지만 시간 관계상 일일이 다 호응해 드리지 못한 점 깊이 양해 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다. 다음으로 오늘 일정을 간단히 설명드리고 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 개회 3일 축사가 있은 후에 1시 40분부터 글로벌 농업 동향 및 농식품 전략 실행 사례 관련 도널드 콜만 연사님의 기조연설이 있겠습니다. 그리고 패널 발표 및 토의하는 순서로 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 그럼 오늘 포럼을 주최하시는 농정원 윤동진 원장님의 개회사가 있겠습니다. 원장님 앞으로 나와주시기 바랍니다. 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
예, 반갑고 환영합니다. 사실은 그 농정원이라는 곳에서 이렇게 국제 행사를 직접 한 세종에서 예처한 거는 굉장히 드문 일이라고 저는 알고 있습니다. 그리고 또 아일랜드 분이 오셔가지고 세계적인 이슈, 그 다음에 한국과의 관련성, 그 다음에 아일랜드의 경험을 나누는 기회는 사실상 처음이 아닌가 싶어요. 저희가 여기 오기 전에 간단히 티타임을 하면서 이런저런 얘기를 했는데 저하고 똑같은 생각을 갖고 계신 거예요. 서로 배울 게 있을 거다. 아일랜드의 경험, 또 한국의 경험을 비슷한 일을 하는 사람들이다, 우리는. 그런 것들을 좀 배우는데 자기가 기여를 하고 싶다고 우리 오늘 연사께서 말씀을 해주셨고요. 조금 제가 설명을 드리자면 왜 이런 자리가 마련되었는지. 사실 농정원이라는 곳이 다양한 일을 합니다. 크게 보면 세 가지인데요. 교육, 그 다음에 디지털, 그 다음에 가치 홍보라는 세 가지 일을 합니다. 그 일을 하다 보니까 특히 교육과 관련해서 조금 더 우리가 벤치마킹을 할 만한 곳이 없을까 하는 것을 오랫동안 찾아왔어요. 우리 직원들이 아일랜드에 무슨 기관이 있다는데 여기를 좀 제대로 배우고 싶습니다 하는 얘기를 저한테 하는 거예요. 그래서 그럼 출장을 가셔라. 도와주겠다. 그 과정에서 우리 주한 아일랜드 대사관 쪽을 접촉을 한 것이고요. 또 아일랜드 대사관 쪽에서 너무 적극적으로 우리 쪽을 도와주시려고 노력을 해주셨다 보니까 우리 전문가가 이번에 오는데 그분하고 한번 같이 얘기하는 시간이 있으면 좋을 것 같습니다. 그래서 이런 자리가 마련된 겁니다. 아시겠지만 뭐 앞부분에 소개를 해주셨지만 여기 진짜 제가 알기로는 우리 농업계에서 가장 전문가분들이 오셨습니다. 그 전문가도 전문가지만 또 워킹데이로 오늘이 첫날이신 우리 국제국장님께서 오셨잖아요. 완전히 그 세레모니를 제대로 하는 거잖아요, 그죠? 국제국장님이 진짜 국제적인 일을 한국의 농업의 문제와 관련된 컨텍스트를 가지고 만나는 자리에 오신 겁니다. 감사드리고, 저는 여기 이제 농정원 원장으로 온 지 한 6개월 됐는데, 앞으로도 조금 이렇게 글로벌한 트렌드와 관련된 이야기를 나누는 자리를 주기적으로 만들고 싶은 생각이 있습니다. 그 뭐 제가 처음에 말씀드린 거와 마찬가지로 우리만 청년농, 디지털 농업, 가치 홍보 쪽으로 일하는 게 아니고 전 세계에 우리처럼 일하는 사람들이 아주 많습니다. 서로 모르고 있을 뿐이고, 그럼 그거를 조금 더 잘하려면 어떻게 될까? 그런 사람들끼리 좀 만나자는 거예요. 사실 한국은 여러 가지 면에서 독특한 나라입니다. 한국은 저도 그 국제 업무를 많이 했지만 독특한 나라라고 제가 말씀드리는 거는 그러니까 서구 선진국이 아니고 그러면서도 여러 개도국들이 관심을 갖는 나라고 농업을 포함한 많은 분야에서 엄청난 성과를 낸 국가거든요. 근데 한 가지 아쉬운 점은 리더나 이니셔티브가 굉장히 약한 국가입니다. 한국이 리드해서 하는 일이 사실은 언론에는 보도는 되지만 사실은 별로 없습니다. 그래서 저는 이런 교육과 이런 부분, 디지털 농정과 관련된 부분들은 뭐 농정원 또 농림부가 같이 힘을 잘 모으면 굉장히 괜찮은 모델을 만들어낼 수 있다 하는 생각을 갖고 있고, 그런 차원에서 이제 오늘이 국제적인 그런 관점에서는 이제 첫째 시도가 되겠습니다만, 앞으로 여기 계신 분들이 같이 고민해 주시고 같이 배우려고 노력해 주시면 달라질 수 있고 충분히 할 수 있다고 생각을 합니다. 여기 오신 분들 농정원 오기 불편하시잖아요, 그죠? 다 환영하고요. 이제 조금 더 편리한 방법으로 저희가 어떻게 하면 좋을까 하는 것들을 오늘 행사를 계기로 의견도 받고 하면서 만들어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 다시 한번 여러분들 모두 환영하고 감사하고 앞으로 농정원하고 함께 여러 가지들 같이 해주시기를 부탁드리겠습니다. 감사합니다.
이어서 주한 아일랜드 대사관 존 히긴스 농무 참사관님의 축사가 있겠습니다. 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
여러분, 반갑습니다. 잘 부탁드립니다. Ladies and gentlemen, President Yoon, distinguished guests and colleagues, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to join you for today's forum and to offer my warm congratulations before we begin what promises to be an engaging and forward-looking programme. I want to start by sincerely thanking EPAS for hosting this event and for the close partnership Ireland and the Republic of Korea continue to build in the field of agriculture. President Yoon, your leadership in championing innovation, sustainability and knowledge exchange is deeply appreciated, and we are honoured to have you participating today on today's panel. Today's forum brings together experts and thought leaders to examine global agriculture trends and challenges ahead. Around the world, agriculture is undergoing a profound transformation. Climate change, shifting demographics, security concerns, and the growing expectations of consumers are reshaping how we produce, trade, and value food. At the same time, rapid advances in technology, from smart farming to genetics and flexible supply chains, are opening new possibilities for efficiency and resilience. Ireland is proud to contribute to this conversation, and particularly to do so here in Korea, a country that shares our commitment to innovation, quality, and long-term sustainability. Irish agriculture has always been defined by the close connection between our land, our farmers, and our communities. In recent years, we've increasingly aligned that tradition with evidence-based policy, ambitious climate action, and a strong focus on animal health and welfare. Our strategy, Food Vision 2030, places sustainability at the heart of Ireland's agri-food sector, economically, environmentally, and socially. It commits us to lowering emissions, restoring biodiversity, improving water quality, and strengthening rural communities, all while maintaining the competitiveness of one of the world's most trusted food systems. Achieving these goals requires not only national commitment, but deep international collaboration, sharing best practice, learning from others, and building resilient global value chains. We export food to over 180 countries. Our reputation for safe, high quality, and sustainable food is something we take pride in, but it's something we continually work hard to improve. I'm delighted that Mr. Donald Coleman could travel to Korea and share with us his 4 decades of experience in sustainable agri-food systems, regulatory governance, and scientific policy making. His presentation will highlight global agriculture trends and challenges, and innovation in areas such as environmentally sustainable farming, supports for farmers, and generational renewal. I'm also especially pleased that this will be followed by a panel discussion, bringing together leading Korean and Irish voices, including President Yoon. Open, expert, and forward-looking dialogue such as this is essential. No country can meet the challenges of sustainable agriculture alone. We need strategic partnerships, shared research, and a common determination to protect both our citizens and our planet. Ireland sees Korea as a vital partner in this work. I would like to congratulate all those who have contributed to organising today's event. Your efforts reflect a shared belief that collaboration is not only beneficial, but essential. If we are to ensure a food system that is sustainable, innovative, and resilient for the decades ahead. I hope today's exchange will spark new ideas, new partnerships, and a deeper understanding of how Ireland and Korea can continue to support each other as we navigate the future of agriculture. And thank you once again for hosting us today, and congratulations to everyone involved in bringing this important forum together. I look forward to the discussions ahead. Thank you very much.
이 자리를 빌려주셔서 소개해 주신 농식품부 정용호 국장님의 축사가 있겠습니다. 국장님 앞으로 나와주시기 바랍니다. 다시 한번 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
안녕하십니까. 농림축산식품부 국제협력관 정용호입니다. 존경하는 윤동진 농정원장님, 주 아일랜드 존 하긴스 농무참사관님, 그리고 귀한 걸음을 해주신 도널드 콜먼 FAO 축산소위원회 의장님, 그리고 이 자리에 함께 해주신 국내 농업 분야 전문가 분 및 관계자 여러분께 깊이 감사드립니다. 먼저 농업과 농촌의 지속가능한 발전을 위해 헌신하고 계시는 우리 농정원의 노력에 감사드립니다. 글로벌 농업 트렌드를 공유하고 우리 농업의 발전 방향을 논의하기 위한 뜻깊은 포럼 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 아까 말씀하셨지만 이 세종에서 이런 국제적인 행사를 하는 것이 새로운 도전이자 상당히 의미 있게 생각을 합니다. 최근 기후 변화와 글로벌 식량 안보의 불안정 속에서 우리 농업이 식량 생산을 넘어 환경을 보존하고 미래의 가치를 창출하는 지속가능한 시스템을 전환해야 되는 중대한 기로에 서 있습니다. 이러한 위기를 잘 극복하기 위해서는 우리 국내적인 노력도 많이 해야 되겠지만 많은 경험을 같이 공유할 수 있는 아일랜드라든지 FAO 등 국제기구와도 같이 머리를 맞대는 노력을 동시에 할 필요가 있다고 봅니다. 특히 이에 이번에 선진 농업 강국인 아일랜드의 사례를 접하고 국제협력의 노하우를 공유하는 것은 매우 의미 있다고 봅니다. 오랜 전통과 혁신 기술을 조화시킨 아일랜드의 지속가능한 농업, 농식품 전략과 글로벌 협력 전략을 같이 공유하는 기회가 될 것으로 생각합니다. 오늘 포럼이 한국 농업의 지속가능한 미래 그리고 구체적인 국제협력 방안을 모색하는 논의의 장이 되기를 기대합니다. 참석해 주신 모든 분들의 적극적인 참여와 깊이 있는 토론이 되기를 기대하며 포럼의 성공적인 개최를 다시 한번 축하드립니다. 감사합니다.
지금부터 도널드 콜만 FAO 축산소위원회 위원장님의 기조 발표가 있겠습니다. 연사님은 아일랜드 농식품부에서 작물 생산 시스템 국장을 지내시고 2022년부터는 FAO 축산소위원회 의장으로 활동하고 계십니다. 연사님을 무대로 모시겠습니다. 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다.
Thank you. It is a pleasure. It's an honour for me to be here this afternoon, I should say. Time differences do that. But a special thank you to President Yoon. Thank you for your kind words earlier and for collating together. And also the new director. I can't help but feel this is an auspicious time for a new party to come in and for me to be here. So for me, it's very good. In the earlier discussion that we've had, and also in the excellent words that I've heard spoken this afternoon in the introductions, it appears to me that there's a huge coming together, as it were, of understanding, of a common awareness of what the world is developing into, if you will, in terms of food systems, but globally in terms of the extraneous drivers, the external drivers that are impacting on how we produce food, how we farm, how we protect our environment, and how we continue to do business. This, I think, for all of us, is probably the biggest challenge, whether we are advanced in food systems, whether we are not, whether we're a net importer or exporter, the principles and the problems remain the same for all of us. So for me, I would like to, take you through, rather than be prescriptive. That is not my task. My task is really to be here to share with you our experience and perhaps to share some information and some background we have that will help you and that will also help us mutually. We want to know what other colleagues are doing as well so that we can learn from you. As the President said, it's a two-way exchange of information. So very briefly, I would like to take you through a short journey from Ireland, because there are two small countries. They're at opposite ends, if you want, of a very big continental divide, but share actually a lot of similarities, despite what might be perceived at the start. So that's why I wish to take some time to take you through why we are where we are, because that informs your discussion and the question you've asked. What is a food system approach? Why does one country do it, another country doesn't? And where are the principles that we can all engage on? So for us, being very, very simply, we started off I suppose, in the Atlantic Ocean. We're the last island to the east of the United States, and there's only water between us. So it's an unfriendly place, if you want, for a very early agrarian society to develop. And basically, all our background has been, it's agrarian in its nature. Our culture is rural in our DNA. It's not urban, despite the developments. And basically, we have suffered some difficulties, particularly through famine, through colonisation. All of those helped shape our history, and they helped put us on a journey to where we are today. So that's just a little bit of something. There we are. That if we were in that position, we only have agriculture. So what do? We can eat so much, but we cannot buy clothes, we cannot buy housing, heat and all with that. So we really need to find a way forward. And how we did that was really in the early 1900s, we were very much into low production, low quality production, commodity type foods, particularly from milk and beef and sheep, because we had the grassland, we had a temperate I suppose, economy and all of that, and weather. So how to do that, but how to make that work for us. In other words, as I said, how to change our story. That really was our starting point. And how then could we were very lucky, being honest, in one particular situation, because our story could change primarily moving from a dependence on the UK, which was our only market at that time, and which also we had a very close friendly and unfriendly political liaison with. That was the nature of the time. So it really constrained us. So we needed something to change, to do that, to let us happen, to make us look outward. And that maybe is the first thing I'd like to change, to share with you. Everything from that point, we look outwards rather than either inwards or relying on ourselves. We want to find out, what can we do? What can we do in the world? How can we make our mark in the world in agriculture, even though we're quite a small country? And basically, the big thing for us was the EU membership. In 1973, we were very early joiner in that. That was extremely important to us because it gave us both the financial support of a huge trading bloc. It gave us political prominence that we did not have before, and a political ability to make change, and also to make change in terms that were favourable to us, and we in turn could contribute to the European Union at that time. So it really was very, very important. And because while we may have been a rural and agrarian society, by our tradition and by our religion and by everything cultural, we're outward looking, which means that we were very ready to embrace Europe. We were very ready to look outwards and to make our mark abroad. Rather than just staying at home and trying to do what we could there, we actually wanted to move forward. Now, we jump to the bottom where, as I think we said before, our agricultural production, since it's beef and milk and dairy in particular, we basically export almost 90% of what we produce across the world. So to do that required huge changes, huge developments in how we did business. You can't just arrive on the world stage and just say, this is our product, please buy it, it's good for you, or it's good for our economy. It's a journey, and you have to build trust, you have to build alliances, and you also have to share with people that, look, we are people you can do business with, and the reason we can. So that really was part of it. I only just include that. That's not really something I want to go into, but it's just a graphic of really, on the right-hand side, we export across the world, but on the left-hand side, as you know, our relationship in terms of food imports, exports with Korea is really a smaller scale. It's confined to dairy, beef, and to all of the products that, as you know, that we have worked with you and that we have shared experience on. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that there isn't a key shared experience there or a key shared goal in terms of our food systems. It doesn't. It means that there are just different areas we can work on, we can develop, and we can share in. And in terms of, just I suppose, quickly, the global marketplace, as John, as my colleague from the embassy alluded to, even before we started on a journey after we joined the EU into a food system approach, so what? Why should we? What is the need for that? Well, as we began to expand, we began, of course, to find that the world itself is changing so rapidly that the global marketplace is really moving faster than we can anticipate. And to be honest, one of the big challenges for us here, whether it's Ireland or whether it's colleagues here in Korea, is actually to stay ahead of that change, to anticipate what is going to happen, and also to be very familiar with the triggers that are driving change. In terms of, and I'm going to touch back on this in a few minutes, the third bullet point there, the human health and well-being. That really is what I will come back to, because that's the refrain when you ask me what a food system is. This is really where it's kicking off. This is where you begin to start. You have, coming down then to the next, you have the pressure of the environment in terms of plant, animal, human health from transboundary. Everybody knows why we have such issues in transboundary at the moment, why they are where they are. But again, also there, a key phrase there is the plant, animal and human health. In other words, the planet itself, its planetary health is where a food system is embedded. They are synonymous with each other. And all of that, biodiversity, environment, are all impacted. So these are all drivers that are both external and internal, and are all shaping the marketplace that we are all operating in, domestically and export. So that's why I just put that there. Clearly also things like uncertainty in the very last point around policy impacts, around trade impacts, trade policy, economic shocks, and particularly, which affects us all, rising input prices are all having a huge impact on shaping our agriculture and food production systems. They have to, because they are the economic drivers of what we do. Within that, I really won't dwell on this too much. It's really because I know there are colleagues here who are expert in OECD more than me. So it's really just to put it there as a placeholder for you when you're talking about what might happen at a high level. And you can see all of the figures there, but you can read those figures in any publication, what's happening. For me, just really all I would like to say, rather than quote on that, in FAO, in FAO, our view, the view of the organisation rather, is that with the increase in world population to probably 10 billion by 2050, the view is that the demand, irrespective of the region, irrespective of the market, demand will rise for animal-based protein by maybe up to 20% at a minimum, based both in terms of the additional increase in population, but also the different changes and classes and categories of economic sectors in countries and their buying purchasing power. So those are things to just bear in mind. You yourselves have your own products, and they vary and they change in terms of marketing, but as an overall, the overall demand, irrespective of plant or animal based, will continue to rise, but the composition of that will naturally change. But that is very much a regional marketing piece. And it's probably not for me, I think, to tell you what you know about your own regional markets. So all of that came. But before that ever happened, we were doing all this 1980s, the 1990s. Our agriculture was good, it was fine, it was moving along, but it wasn't at the level that would support a huge drive in our economy. It simply wasn't. It was good. We had a lot of meat exports, but they were still trading in I suppose, low-value, semi-commodity. It took time, and our meat factories were developing. We were developing a greater understanding of food safety at that time, a greater understanding of what international markets required from us. How do you do that? How do you increase the value added, but yet meet these market requirements all within a competitive cost frame? So all of that was more and more complex, and we're following it, I think, rather than leading it is possibly a fair statement. But that had to change, because if you're going to export so much product, that's not a viable option for you. So by 2000, it was clear that we needed to change our approach. You know, it wasn't for the future. So this is where we didn't call it a food system approach. We didn't know the term in the year 2000, to be honest. It was just an integrated production approach, but it was clear that we needed a cross-sector, cross-departmental approach, all stakeholders to be involved. So that meant collaboration, not only within the ministry, but across ministries, all across industry, stakeholders, cooperatives, farmers' organisations, food agencies, food marketing groups, all of that, the development sector. We had to come in, bring all of those together, which we did. And that was the key to creating a dynamic shift in our agri-system, and that was the beginnings, if you want, an embryonic start of an integrated food system approach. We started it then, but had the idea, which I think was really good at the time, that we needed not just a specific strategy stuck in time. In other words, you develop the strategy based on the international dynamics there, and that's the problem solved. That wasn't the case. It had to be a rolling strategy. It had to be continuously open to updating, to developing, to changing, let's be honest, because every 5 years the market is changing quite dramatically. So it wasn't really possible. So even though we called them 10-year strategies, we actually tended to update them every 5 years, which is a contradiction in its own sense, but it's a logic and it works really well. And it has to be done, to be honest. That's just, I'm sharing very briefly things we called them, and the names to some extent, I suppose, indicate where our priorities were at the time. So agri-food, they were very much production-based. Industry, in other words, more volume, more production, and more value added. Kind of all the way through until, let's say, the last one, 2025, food-wise, where it is becoming much broader, much more, I suppose, sophisticated in what it contained. And basically, it allowed all of the stakeholders to grow with the sectors and to take ownership. At the start, farmers found it very difficult to I think, engage to the level we needed for them to engage in the changes we wanted to make and how we wish to do business. Naturally, anything new is difficult. Anything new is suspicious, so we had to do all of this. And I suppose we were doing fine until such a time, nationally, we had a lot of broader development in terms of commerce, of finance, until the crash of 2007, 2008. And at that stage, it became clear after we'd had the International Monetary Fund, etc., and all the issues that countries had, that actually agriculture and our agri-food sector was probably the bedrock that remained, if you want, of our future. That was what we built on, and I think from all of that, it was able to withstand a lot of the financial shocks. It was able to root the rural communities in stability, rather than allowing our sector in rural areas to be a little bit jolted and people not to have access to the normal employment and financial considerations. The agri-food sector was very embedded and was able to maintain a certain level of support for those sectors. So all of that was key, and of course naturally the other part was that all stakeholders were at that time regularly consulted. You did not do anything, nothing about me without me is probably a reasonable way of putting that. You don't tell a core sector, this is what we're going to do, and they're one of your stakeholders. That's the recipe for failure. I only said that because we found that out, so I'm not saying something that we're superior. That's how life is. That's how every sector of community is. If you don't engage me, I distance, I recuse myself from discussion. So this is where we were at. But again, nothing stands still, and it seems like it's a negative story of challenge everywhere, but it wasn't. But nonetheless, by about 2018, 2019, it became clear to us that the world had changed again, that it was quite... My apologies. I hope because of translation you haven't missed. So if anything that I was unclear on through not talking to the microphone, please ask me afterwards. I'm happy to do that. So apologies for that. But again, everything had changed. You were now moving in. Now, we hadn't realised at this point we were going to have a COVID outbreak, a pandemic, but nonetheless, it was coming clear that there were major world movements, that our existing approach probably weren't sufficiently robust in our agri-food sector to address or to withstand. So at that time, the UN and the United Nations Food System Strategy was being developed, and we were very central to that in Ireland because we understood with our own background what the UN was trying to do and the FAO was trying to do, because we had been close in partnership with that organisation for a long time. So we weren't unfamiliar that what we were seeing at home was actually being reflected at a more world level, that the changes we thought were necessary were actually being thought of as well in the international stage. So At that stage, we took a decision, and the government took a decision. No longer would we have a unilateral strategy, if you want, for agri-food. We would change completely to a systems approach, sustainable food systems approach, which sounds fine in theory, but of course in practice is quite difficult. It's complex, and it brought its own issues with it. But nonetheless, everything food system, basically, somebody asked me earlier, what do we understand by a food system? And we can go into some detail later, but a food system approach recognises its interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected between policies for food, for climate, for environment, for health. And again, I come back to the human, animal, and environment and planetary. So we're no longer into a production cycle. We're more into my apologies, we're no longer into a production cycle only. We're now into resilience. We are moving away. It doesn't mean that production, productivity, marketing, they're all there. They're all alive. They're all priorities, but they're not just the solo drivers of your society. They're actually supporting more complex needs within your society. So this is how we came to be in this situation, I suppose, where we took the technical aspects of previous strategies, but try to reconfigure them into a food systems approach, develop them, bring them up to date, take every aspect of the food chain and all of the stakeholders in each node of that, in each link of that chain, were all brought together. So they were all partners in the process. By doing that also, when you had an agreement through a group, you also made it much more difficult for people not to accept and not to work within the system because they were part of it. So, it's not as easy to be negative and to shout from the sidelines when actually you yourself have been part of the process. So that was, I think, very good for us. But the very last point then is social cohesion, which you're all very familiar with through all the various things. But that's economic, environmental and social sustainability. But for us, all of those had an importance of its own. None of them was subsumed or made less to another of the cycle, in other words, to the social equity cycle. Everything had to have its place. How that reflected in reality was that whether you were a farmer or whether you were an NGO in terms of protecting biodiversity, you also had an equal part, but you didn't come to the table on the basis that you were a superior fit to some of the other pieces of social fabric. You weren't. They were all key parts of that. So that was really part of it. And very briefly, I'll quick through that. It also, these were issues that really made that difficult because, as my colleague John alluded before, when you're having all these groups together and you're trying to get solidarity and to avoid conflict, these are issues that you have to take on board and resolve them and at least put them on the table because they are already there. So that's something to be watched and to be put into play. And we did that. But of course, which I didn't mention below, was the UN sustainability goals had to underpin that because naturally if we're doing a food system approach, it's based on the UN food system. So it must align with the development sustainable SDGs, as you know them, and the United Nations Climate Change Convention factor. So you cannot go outside these broad parameters and just say, well, look, we'll do what actually works very well for us. You can only do that within all these external frameworks. So all of us, yourselves included, we all fit within these things. And of course, at the last, which I know isn't directly applicable with yourselves, the European Common Agricultural Policy, which really is the underpinning for all of that, what we do. But we had to also align with all of that. So by September 2021, when the United Nations Food Systems Summit took place, we presented our national food system strategy as the Ireland's submission in terms of change to a full food system approach for agriculture, and we've moved on from there, and that's just to share. So it's the only thing I want to say there is on top left, Government of Ireland. So it's a government strategy. So I think it's important. We can never underestimate. This isn't an industry. This isn't the ministry. This is the government. So that's what we mean. This is why we take these things as seriously as we do. Now, I suppose, and I'll move on from that, but it's really just a slide in case anybody is interested afterwards. I know a lot of you are in international development, but just to share with you that as well as being engaged with the UN food system and the +2 and the +4, it also has to align with all of the WHO and all of the approaches around the Hunger Coalition, around healthy diets and all of that. So it synergises and links in with those as well, which is, of course, the Food Systems Hub, which is housed in the FAO itself in Rome. So it had to align with that. I'll quickly go through this because it's technical and there are pieces I can do later if people want it. But basically speaking, it's a sector. It's moving away from sector. It's systems-wide engagement. So whatever mission, whichever goal or whichever action isn't specifically the responsibility of one agency or one grouping. It's a systems approach. You have cross-government approaches to that, but primarily built around, for Ireland, you might have a different set of priorities, but for Ireland, it's built around the 4 main missions or priority pillars that have developed with us. And as you can imagine, climate and environmental sustainability for the sector is one of the main ones. And I've just included some information there on some of the issues that specifically addresses. And I'm going to just quickly show some of them before I finish after. Resilient, this is very important for us. And it's a new aspect as well when you talk about food systems, and lest I forget it, under the second point, resilient primary producers with enhanced well-being. Well-being is something we don't always include in strategies. It's not something we think about. We sometimes think of strategies in technical or financial or economic terms. But all our production comes from farmers. That's a fact. I haven't produced much other than, I suppose, statements of strategy and that, but somebody's got to produce the food. And the farmer has to be there, but farmers are isolated, and we'll come to it later. And you have a situation here as well, I think the world has, in terms of you have less farmers, you have older farmers. It's difficult. You're on your own. I think a lot of farmers don't feel they're adequately supported. That's a natural feeling in life. And it's to maybe tackle that and be a little bit more proactive on what do farmers need, talking with them, our extension services, what can they do? Our education, agricultural education, how do they lock on to the farming community? What do we do there? That's a huge challenge for us. It's a huge challenge for everybody, but that's part of it. So it's not just how we can be smarter, better producers with more milk. It's also the broader farmer welfare piece. So that's what I mean by a systems approach. You're always trying to draw strands together. Food safety and nutrition, I think I'll leave that as it is, but really, as you know, what that boils down to is having both nutrition and food safety as a premier point, both in terms of your consumers at home and a trusted purchasers in the international marketplace. So it's hugely important, hugely expensive in terms of resources, in terms of human resources, financial, but you will not have a food system if it looks out without being doing all of that to the very highest level. It is not possible to do that and to retain any level of market confidence. So that's the full sector of its own. It also includes healthy diet, nutrition, lifestyle and stages of vulnerability in human condition, whether it's in pregnancy, old age, young children. So all of this is brought together. The Ministry of Health are part of this feature as well. So you're always linking other players to give you a broader, holistic line on any of these. And of course, the innovation, which is, I think you yourselves, I probably won't address it at all because I suspect in technological innovation and all of that, you're world leaders anyway. So it's just really sharing what we do in that space, but I don't think you would have much to learn from us in that. So it's just something. But there are a few examples we will come through in terms of smart farming. For us, is slightly different perhaps to smart farming for you. The needs are slightly different, and that drives maybe the pathways of your technological advancement in slightly different ways. But I'll share a few of them, and you are familiar with them. That just the AgNav, the Carbon Navigator tool, is probably one of them, which is a free tool. It incorporates all of the, I suppose, the data that is available through the public network, puts it together into big data, but also reduces it down into a farm tool that will actually give you options that you can use. But again, there are issues around that in terms of how you roll that out, education, age of your profile age, things of that nature. But nonetheless, those are things. So very quickly going through, just as an example of the Mission 1, and for the climate smart, environmentally sustainable food sector, we have a particular problem in this area. That's why I use it, partly because I know you're interested, but partly because it's an example of a unique challenge to us. So I think you'll feel better to see that we have huge problems that you mightn't have, so just to see what we do with them. Because agriculture is such a dominant industry with us, we don't have very much, we have virtually no heavy industry. So we have no manufacture, we have no car manufacture, we have no metal industry. It's mainly finance and all of that. Therefore, of course, agriculture has a hugely disproportionate bearing on emissions. And at least 30% of our national emissions come from agriculture. That's understandable, which is a huge problem because it makes us stand out really, really like a sore thumb in terms of any other country. Over probably half of those, methane is naturally with livestock. So you see where I'm coming from. These are huge issues and we have national plans. So it was the biggest initial challenge for us. And we have a climate action plan. Now that has been updated since 23, but informed by the UN Convention. We have sectoral emissions set down for each sector under the national carbon budget. And we have the 2030 EU climate action targets as well. And of course, we have the EU Green Deal, these things farm to fork, and all of these. So these all came together to actually set a very, very prescriptive, difficult position for us. And the net result is we had to reduce, and still are working on it, reducing our emissions down by 25% from, I think it's 2018 to 2030. So these are significant challenges and significant goals for us to make. So hence we have so many actions, as you see, 60 actions. But again, we call in, we can't do them by ourselves, let's say in agriculture, we can't do them by the ministry alone, so we call in everybody else, all the other stakeholders that are part of our food systems. We call in the water people, we call in environmental people, we call in everybody, all of the sectors. We call in also all of these people in terms of the people who are helping us market a safe, clean food. All of them must come in to share some of the work we're doing. And that's how those three goals were developed, just that I've explained at the top, and then all the way down, what we do, how you do all of those. Those are just titles, and that's why I'm not spending detail on them, because it's when you go into the detail of those, you get the reality. But just to give you a sense, that's how the broad parameters are set out and the structure. And really coming down to goal 7, which is sort of the outcome again in terms of market and of food systems, to strengthen and the sustainable supports to reflect the higher level of ambition through our national system of food support and food integration, if you want, the Origin Green, which are the state and semi-state bodies that bring together industry and farmers to meet specific conditions on farm, whether it's at the farm level in terms of your production, but also at your industry level in terms of what you're doing there, so that we bring everybody on board and everybody is sharing on this. So everybody has targets and they're all specific, but everybody shares some of that. So you don't just have targets coming all the way down on farmers. That never works. Everybody has to share within the delivery of these targets. And again, that was just bringing you down. Really, it's cascade. I started with the mission, then down to the goals, and then down to a specific goal. And these are just to share, these are some specific indicators for actions within goal 1, which is bringing down the emissions. And the reason I mention it here is because of livestock, which is my working area at the moment. And those are some of the things we're trying to do. So methane, 10% down on that for the moment. Ammonia and nitrous oxide, greater than 50 reduction, because they're almost all coming from chemical fertilizers and from animal manures that are probably not properly spread and set. So these are things that we can do because there's technical solutions to many of those. Same thing, the 50% reduction in nutrient loss. An awful lot of that, a very high proportion of that, comes from the misuse and the misapplication of both fertilizers and in some cases pesticides, the overuse, incorrect timing, incorrect dates, incorrect, I suppose, soil health to allow these nutrients to play their part. So again, it's a suite, and of course, again, the jurisdiction, Teagasc, the Education and Research Authority has the major part to play in that, because they are the scientific experts. So they really lift a lot of the burden on that for us. Biodiversity, in other words, increasing the area given to riparian zones along rivers, high nature value lands, all of this that are not cultivated seriously. And then, of course, all of that, farmers and I suppose processors all sign up to a quality assurance, okay, through the Origin Green, but again, through such things, Carbon Navigator. And the reason I mention that is part of the Ag Navigator, but the only reason I mention it is because these are tools that actually contain metrics, they're data, they're measurable, they're supportable, and they're shareable. So these are ways, if you can measure it, you can do it. So it's really to utilise these issues that are available to us. And I use that. I'm not sure if this is something you use here. It's called a marginal abatement cost curve. It's a marginal abatement cost curve. It's a long, unwieldy title, but what we do with it is try to calculate what any specific action at farm level might have, the impact it might have on reducing our carbon footprint, on reducing emissions. And it's a complicated document, but it really looks at things, the cost of something, what it adds, is it valuable, does it add value, is it feasible? And even in terms of putting in, as put there, a carbon price, the international carbon market, I used a figure there, I think that's probably $80 a tonne, but it's a figure just to give you a sense. Anything above that figure, well, it's a diminishing return, you're not solving much. But anything below the line, really, really good. And see there, for instance, the Dairy Economic Breeding Index on the very left. So you can see the benefit of something like that in terms of reducing your output of emissions, but actually without cost. In fact, that's a negative. It's a positive. It's income, and it's very effective. So doing things like that, to put figures and to put structure and understanding on things like that, and this is the kind of thing Teagasc does in its research to support reduction in emissions. And I'll briefly through just those. You've seen most of those, but just examples of, again, I mentioned Origin Green, and in the middle document, or the middle graph, infograph, is just really various sectors all fit in with this. So again, everybody is part of this. Everybody is part of the story. Everybody is part of the narrative. And just on the right, the farmer giving the possible Carbon Navigator tools, putting in your data at farm level, getting out a result, etc., to give you a sense of where are you at with what you're trying to do, and with Origin Green, if you're a member of that. So everybody plays their part, whether it's the Teagasc advisor, whether it's the farmer, him or herself, or whether it's an industrial component, or Board BIA, our International Trading Board, utilising it to support markets. I suppose harnessing innovation, because you put me in mind of it, because coming here where innovation is key, I thought I'd share something just very quickly with you. What does it mean to us? And this really goes back to what I mentioned there about the carbon, the dairy breeding index, and the positive effect it has. In terms of doing things that don't cost too much and are not technical, but yet have a huge impact, particularly on a dairy sector. In the beef sector, we have the National Genotyping Programme under our National Cattle Breeding Federation, which is a conglomerate of industry, of ministry. Everybody pays into it, and farmers. But they have this system, and they've developed it now, and Teagasc part of it as well, developing 3 huge indices. One of them is the carbon subindex in dairy breeding, which is really to use traits in the dairy sector, which are carbon support, carbon friendly, building those into the selection of high index bulls for breeding, things of that nature. So it's again allowing farmers the ability to see, to visualise in front of them that a bull of such and such calibre actually has a carbon reducing capacity as well. So it's moving on to try and use, in our case, innovation being breeding innovation, genomics is very strong with us, that does that. We moved on then, and that's of course in progeny breeding. We move on then, of course, to testing in terms of beef and in terms of the male centre of that, and looking at enteric methane evaluations. It's very complex. We find because methane emissions are difficult to measure. They're complex and they're costly because it's really you need physical animals and you need the progeny of let's say a bull, a bear, a dairy or beef bull. So it's slow, but it's really critical to us because that also allows you to do some prediction of methane emissions in the beef sector. So that's why we're doing that. And then at the bottom is the one we're doing now to underpin those, which is a national genotyping programme for the entire national herd. That involves a DNA profile of all animals. And the reason for it is it gives, if you want, a passport, a DNA passport. And that information then becomes available to all of those players, whether it's Teagasc, the international, the ministry of itself, the Research Council. So it underpins, using science to underpin several different approaches that you can take. And it's just for an example. AgNav, I'll go through it quickly, but I think you're maybe familiar with that. Again, taking all of the farm data and all of the production data from those three bodies that they've come together to produce this carbon, but basically a tool for using information on the farm to kind of predict what your output is, what your carbon profile is, and just all of those, and other things as well, because as more data goes into this navigator, the more it can do for you, the more prediction it can do. It can actually tell you between whether or not which are the least, I suppose, environmentally impactful, but also things like which are the most economically beneficial, and allows you to make decisions on what is your farm, what do you want to do with it, where is the balance for you. But of course you need a Teagasc or another, you need a consultant to go through that with you. It's complex, and I suppose that's that. And again, I won't go into this, but Teagasc being our national research and advisory body, they have those big support, so those big activities, which is advisory services, which you're probably familiar enough with, all at farm level, on everything to do with farm schemes, farm advisory, biodiversity, the water framework, rules and regulations. They support farmers in doing all that on farm, one-to-one as an advisory service. Of course, they also do extension services, which sometimes is a broader piece, going into farm walks where you have groups of farmers taken together to build up that collegiality in your farming sector. So all of that to give evidence-based knowledge to both individual and groups of farmers that they can also use peer learning themselves, and that's part of it. And of course, the more formal third piece, the more formal educational and training piece. So that's true. The colleges and the certification and all of that, that's quite highly developed, by the way, in terms of young farmers must complete green certificates to QL level 6s and 7, which is just a national third level, I suppose, technical scope or degree. So something like that. And I just put in at the very bottom, while it's not specific, but the Teagasc itself has a Technology Foresight 2035 programme, which really is trying to identify all those emerging technologies over and above what's there in the first three, what's coming, what they can learn. And there are now in Teagasc and state-supported actual incubator systems, in other words, to look at cutting-edge technology, next stage's product, so that it all begins to feed into each other, and that in turn comes back to the farm level. And this is the very last one, and I'll finish then. Generational renewal, and we know that that's an issue. So, as I said earlier, there is a strong support for farming communities and indeed from off-farm communities. Farming communities, particularly through CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union, has quite a range of financial and other support. So that is a strong underpinning for the farmers. We also go beyond that. The wider living rural community, which I'd referred to it earlier, they also receive a range of supports really through, I suppose, wider rural programs, such as a LEADER programme, which is really to look at communities and give them some supports. In addition to inside the farm gate, you must also provide some support outside the farm gate, because they are both rural dwelling, I suppose, communities, and they must grow together. You can't just exclude one from the other. And finally is the Government Commission on Generational Renewal, which has just been published. reasoning because, like everybody else, we have a very significant issue. Who's going to carry on farming because of all the issues around farming, despite, as I said earlier, all the things we try to do to support farming, which we do. Nonetheless, a lot of young people feel, I think there's a perception, particularly in Europe, that farming is not as attractive, it's a more difficult, societally wise, people don't favour it as a favoured occupation. So that's something that the government feels it has to tackle, quite at government level, by the way. So these are just some of the things, and that's our minister was just a picture of him launching the report at the ploughing championships that we have, which is a huge farming get together. But I'm just giving you a very, very quick snapshot. What are the issues? Without going into detail, we don't have time. But these are the issues that are highlighted that either are being addressed or need to be addressed to give some long-term future to bringing young people into agriculture, and there they are. So we need better at young entrants and coming into agriculture. For in terms of European schemes, young people have to have more favoured status than they have, but equally, if we want farmers to retire, you can't cut them loose because they won't retire. So it's a zero-sum game. You need both sides of that particular coin. So we're focusing on that. Taxation. Taxation is a huge issue as well. Land transfer, transfer from father to son to other members. All of those are complex taxation issues, and they do slow down the succession in farming, and we do have to tackle those. Access to finance. Farming is extremely complex and it's extremely expensive. So you have so much money to either access land, to stock it, and any of those things. So we need financial supports for that. Again, as I said, access to land. How does that happen? So little land comes on the open market every year. We have to have a way of addressing that. Education, which we've gone through advisory. Collaborative farming. Transitioning from older farmers to younger farmers, where you have maybe some collaborative farming where an older farmer scales back, a younger farmer who doesn't have land. It's a way of getting into farming where you have minimal financial input, but you develop your own farming system within that, and it works hopefully for both. So it's, again, finding ways of moving beyond just the negative at the moment, and gender balance, naturally, to make sure that we're properly represented by, strands of society must all be represented, and gender is a key part of that, and it's a challenge as well that we must overcome. And health and safety, that also comes with mental well-being, just social supports for farmers to make it more attractive again. And I suppose finally, pension provisions, in other words, how all that works, how you can make that more attractive, more practical, and how to retain farmers. So these are just issues that are there, but they're only starting. It takes some time to work these through. Some of those you may find relevant to you, others not. But just for us, this is the kind of interface we are trying to face now. So I suppose on that, I think I may have extended more than the time, but you didn't say anything, so I kept going through the presentation. So I hope it's of some interest, and if we can share something afterwards, I'm very happy to do so. But as I said earlier, Mr. President, we don't have all the answers today, so what I can't answer, I will take away and come back to you. So thank you, everybody.
지금부터 패널 토의를 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 패널 토의는 도널드 콜만 연사님, 존 히긴스 참사관님, 서진규 GSNJ 인스티튜트 원장님, 유지연 서울대 교수님, 그리고 농정원 윤동진 원장님께서 참여해 주셨습니다. 그리고 오늘 좌장으로는 김창길 사단법인 스마트치유 산업포럼 원장님께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 김창길 원장님께서는 농촌경제연구원 원장, 서울대 특임교수를 역임하시고 농특위 농어촌 분과위원장으로 활동하고 계십니다.
네, 뵙게 돼서 반갑습니다. 또 이러한 자리에 초청해 주신 우리 윤동진 원장님께 감사드리고, 사실 제가 농정원은 2023년 한 2년 전이네요. 그때 혁신위원회가 있어서 아마 몇 차례 방문했었고, 여기 위원으로 활동하신 분들 몇 분을 뵐 수 있었습니다. 아까 원장님께서 말씀을 하셨습니다마는 농업 관련된 기관, 특히 농정원에서 이런 글로벌 트렌드라는 주제로 국제 세미나를 개최한 경우는 아마 그렇게 많지 않고, 솔직히 말씀드려서 아일랜드를 전문가를 초청한 세미나는 저도 농촌경제연구원에 한 31년 근무를 했습니다만 거의 없었던 것 같습니다. 오늘 여기 농식품부에 정용욱 국장님이나 지금 하정수 과장님 와 계십니다만은 왜 이 시점에 아일랜드를 우리가 또 전문가를 통해서 공부해야 되고 또 이런 귀중한 기회가 필요한지를 우리 OECD에 오랫동안 근무하신 윤동진 국장님께서 캐치하시고 또 이런 자리를 마련한 것 같습니다. 제가 이걸 준비하면서 아일랜드 농업에 대해서 나름대로 공부를 했는데요. 아일랜드는 국민소득이 9만 불 이상으로 1인당 세계 룩셈부르크 다음으로 2등 3위를 하는 굉장히 중요한 나라입니다. 또 하나는 아일랜드는 농업 인구가 우리나라가 지금 농가구가 97만 호 정도 되는데 아일랜드는 한 14만 호 정도밖에 되질 않아요. 그럼에도 불구하고 아까 말씀드린 대로 농산물 수출이 농업 생산의 거의 90%에 달성할 수 있을 정도로 수출 지향적이고 또 글로벌 스탠다드에 맞춰서 농업을 열심히 농업 정책을 추진하고 있습니다. 오늘 짧은 시간이기 때문에 오늘 전문가 우리 더널 의장님께서 설명하지 못한 분야도 있을 텐데요. 오늘 저는 강조하고 싶은 것이 이 아일랜드라는 국가가 잘하고 있는 것이 오늘 아까 제가 여기 여러분들 T-GASC라는 것이 있습니다. T-E-A-G-A-S-C 이분 여기 논문에 보면 저도 이걸 보고 했는데 발음이 굉장히 어렵습니다. 그래가지고 제가 우리 존 히긴스 제가 이분은 작년에도 미 대사관 미팅에서 이제 뵀었는데 발음을 좀 한번 들려달라고 그랬는데 How do you pronounce T-GAS? 초그스라고 그래요.
Irish words can be very difficult.
그래서 오늘 세션에 참석하는 분이 초그스크, right? 초그스크. 이 발음만 제대로 알아도 굉장히 중요한데 이것이 왜 중요하냐? 우리나라 농촌진흥청 그리고 농업과 교육하는 기관이 통합된 기관으로 1988년도에 설립되었고 어떻게 보면 지금 오늘 여러 가지를 설명한 우리 더널 위원장님께서 아일랜드 농정의 어떻게 보면 선두, 리더 이런 역할을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 나중에 저희 토론하면서 또 질문도 하고 하겠습니다만 그런 것들이 아일랜드 오늘 아까 저 원장님께서 이제 앞으로 시사점 우리 농정원이 주는 시사점 이런 것도 여기 어드바이저리 하는 거고 여기는 R&D 기능이 있네요. R&D 기능이 있고 이걸 또 이렇게 전파하는 우리가 기술 보급 기능도 있고 여러 가지가 있는데 하여튼 굉장히 시사하는 점이 커서 오늘 여기에 지금 농정원 가족들도 있지만 외부 인사들도 많이 계신데요. 한번 관심 있게 아일랜드의 어떻게 농정의 혁신 그런 핵심적인 내용을 설명을 해 주셨습니다. 오늘 연사분들과 관련돼서는 토론자로 지금 발표하신 두 분을 포함해서 지금 6분입니다만은 지금 토론과는 우리 서진교 원장님, GSNJ의 서진교 원장님은 서진교 원장님 그리고 윤지연 교수님 그리고 또 오늘 원장님인데도 또 토론자로도 참석을 해주시기 때문에 원장님 이렇게 있고 이제 발표자가 있습니다만 그래서 이제 뭐 알무는 우리 서진교 원장님은 사실 DSNJ 인스티튜트 이정환 이사장님이 이제 몇 년 전에 돌아가셨습니다만 DSN 인스티튜트의 원장을 2023년부터 맡으셔가지고 과거에는 농촌경제연구원에서 함께 근무했던 적도 있고 지금 대외경제정책연구원에서 특히 트레이드 분야로는 국내 최고의 전문가로서 활동을 해주셨습니다. 그래서 오늘 순서는 서진교 원장님, 그 다음에 윤지연 교수님, 그 다음에 우리 원장님, 그리고 제가 마지막에 또 플러스에서 코멘트도 하고 질문도 하고 나중에 시간이 되면 또 이렇게 오늘 발표하신 선생님한테 코멘트 듣고 오늘 또 존 히긴스도 역시 아까 축산을 했습니다만은 또 아일랜드 농업에 대해서 또 그런 코멘트 관련돼서 이렇게 하는 그런 식으로 또 플로어에도 좀 시간이 되는 대로 우리 플로어에서도 또 질문을 받으면서 딱딱하지 않고 이게 좀 녹화가 되나요? 네. 너무 딱딱하지 않고 재밌게 이렇게 하려고 그래요. 너무 이게 토론회 이런 것들이 너무 딱딱하고 보는 사람도 그렇고 그런데 아무튼 이거를 들어주시는 분들은 아일랜드 농업을 공부한다 이렇게 생각하시고 같이 이 시간 같이 하시면 될 것 같습니다. 그럼 먼저 서진교 원장님께서 말문을 좀 열어주시기 바랍니다.
네, 준비는 영어로 할까 해서 준비를 좀 해왔는데 역시 한국어로 하는 게 더 편할 것 같아서 여러분이 또 이해하시기도 더 편하실 것 같고요. 그냥 한국어로 하겠습니다. 제가 이 아일랜드의 푸드 비전 그 2030을 갖다가 이렇게 천천히 설명하시는 걸 듣고 오늘 프레젠테이션 그 콜만 선생님 얘기 듣고 머릿속에 딱 떠오르는 거 한 단어가 하나 있었습니다. 단어 하나가 interconnectedness라고. 그것이 굉장히 그 의미하는 바가 굉장히 그 많은 것 같습니다. 그래서 이제 첫 번째는 이제 우리나라 말로 한다면 이제 연결성 이렇게 얘기하는데 그게 지금 푸드 그 비전 2030을 만들 때 프로덕션 생산서부터 해가지고 식탁 그 소비뿐만이 아니라 소비하는 다음에 웨이스트 디스포절까지 그 폐기 처리하는 것까지 전 과정에 걸친 그 가치 사슬이라고 할까요? 그 사슬 매 단계마다 얼마나 많은 그 이해관계자 스테이크홀더들이 있었겠습니까? 우리나라도 마찬가지 아닙니까? 그 생산을 하는 농어민이 있을 것이고, 그 다음에 수확, 가공, 유통, 처리하는 사람들도 있을 거고, 그 다음에 당연히 소비자들이 먹겠죠. 근데 다들 그 프라이어리티, 자기가 중시 생각하는 것들은 다들 조금씩 다 다르잖아요. 생산자, 농민들은 가급적이면 많은 수확을 해서 돈을 벌고 싶은데, 소비자들은 그거에 관계없이 affordable한 프라이스니까 적절한 가격에서 안전한 농산물을 갖다 식품을 갖다가 품질 좋은 식품을 먹고 싶으니까 사실 이해관계가 꼭 같다고는 볼 수 없는 거죠. 그리고 마지막에 또 식품 그 처분이랄까 폐기할 때는 사실 포장 같은 게 굉장히 잘 분해되는 그런 포장을 하면 더 환경에 유익하겠죠. 그런데 그런 포장을 하려면은 가격이 굉장히 비싸지겠죠. 그러니까 그 수많은 스테이크홀더들의 이해관계가 다 다른데 그 뒤에는 뭐가 있습니까? 저는 그 정부 기관, 미니스터들이 있다고 생각합니다. 그러니까 농식품부가 있을 거고, 푸드 팔러시에는 또 그 다음에 세이프티 팔러시에는 우리나라 같으면 식약청, 푸드 앤 드러그 어드미니스트레이션 같은 것들이 있을 거고, 뭐 환경과 관련해서는 환경부가 있겠고, 그 다음에 또 영양과 관련해가지고는 농식품부도 있지만 뭐 환경부나 여러 가지, 그 다음에 루럴 팔러시 같은 것은 또 농식품부에서도 관련돼 있지만 행안부도 또 사실 조금 관련돼 있죠. 그런데 어떻게 이걸 다 통합해가지고 푸드 시스템 어프로치를 했을까? 저는 그게 제일 궁금하더라고요. 그게 굉장히 많은 이해 갈등이 있어가지고 각 부처마다 농식품부 장관은 다를 거고, 환경부 장관은 또 다를 거고, 그 다음에 영양적인 측면에서 보는 사람은 또 다를 거고, 우리나라 같으면은 부처 간에 칸막이가 쳐져 있고, 아일랜드도 저는 처음에 그 크게 다르다고 생각하지는 않습니다. 그러니까 중요한 거는 분명히 이해관계자들이 많아가지고 인터커넥트드니스, 그걸 잘 내부적으로 이렇게 연결시켜서 이해관계를 조율했다는 거거든요. 그 조율하는 과정에 어려움이 분명히 많았을 건데, 이제 그런 어려움이 무엇이었을까, 어떻게 그걸 해결했을까, 뭐 해결까지는 안 해더라도 상당히 많이 이렇게 조율했을까라 그런 생각이 들고, 근데 인터커넥트드니스는요, 비단 국내 도메스틱한 팔러시에서 그 스테이크홀더 간의 이해관계뿐만 아니라 아까 보셨듯이 FAO나 UN, FCC랑도 이렇게 커넥티드가 돼 있잖아요. 그래가지고 거기에 따른 어떤 다양한 형태의 그 지침들, 특히 이제 뭐라 그럴까, 이제 그걸 영어로 하면 through the lens of sustainability라고 그런 거죠. 그러니까 지속 가능한 관점에서 이렇게 연결을 했을 텐데, 국제 기준에 이렇게 연결을 했을 텐데, 그때도 그렇게 쉽지는 않았을 것 같아요. 국제 기준을 갖다 국내적으로 그냥 무작본적 받아들이기도 어려울 거고, 물론 아무리 그 서스테이너빌리티라도 지속 가능이 중요하다 그래도 이제 그런 것들이 갈등이 많았을 텐데 어떤 식으로 잘 받아들이고 이렇게 국내적으로 조율했을까, 이제 그런 것들이 우리나라한테 주는 굉장히 좋은 경험이고 귀중한 어떤 그 배움이라 그럴까요? 그런 게 될 수 있다고 생각하고, 그 다음에 세 번째 마지막으로는 사실은 여기도 나와 있는데 이제 한 단어로 나와 있어서 여러분들이 어쩜 휙 넘어갔을지도 모르는데, 이게 이 푸드 시스템 어프로치라는 게 결국은 그 밑바닥에 이렇게 펀더멘탈하게 보면은 뭐 어떤 문제가 있냐면 이코노믹 그 서스테이너빌리티, 경제적으로 어떤 추구하는 서스테이너빌리티가 있고, 그 다음에 순수하게 환경론자들, 이제 environmental sustainability가 있어요. 그러니까 환경 입장에서는 더 그걸 또 막 추구하는 거죠. 그 다음에 마지막으로 우리가 이제 간과하기 쉬운 거가 social sustainability. 그러니까 사회적으로도 아까 그 골만 그 선생님 얘기했듯이 루럴 농촌 주민들의 그 어떤 생활이나 삶도 무시할 수가 없었다. 그런 간에 그 서스테이너빌리티가 다들 다르긴데 그거 역시 어떤 그 밸런스를 취하는 거가 근본적으로 이 푸드 비전 2030에서 근본적으로 굉장히 어렵게 고민했을 것 같은 밑바닥의 어떤 근본적인 그 해결해야 될 아일랜드 정부로서 문제였을 거다. 뭐 그런 생각이 들더라고요. 그래서 저는 핵심이 인터커넥티드니스와 어떤 다양한 그 스테이크홀더 간의 인터레스트를 어떻게, 갈등을 어떻게 잘 조율하고 이렇게 뭐랄까 통합을 했을까. 그래서 어떤 하나로 어떤 국가의 정책으로 내세웠을까. 그 과정에 얼마나 많은 어려움이 있었겠는가. 이제 그런 것들의 경험을 좀 들려주셨으면은 아마 그 한국이 앞으로 다양한 형태의 이해관계를 갖다가 이렇게 조율한다 그럴까요? 그런데 큰 도움이 되지 않을까. 뭐 그런 생각을 한번 해봤습니다. 혹시
네.
추후에 또 질문할 기회가 있다면은 뭐
알겠습니다.
다른 것들 한번 해보고, 일단 그게 가장 중요할 것 같습니다.
네, 서진교 원장님께서 주로 이제 농업과 관련된, 식품과 관련된 것은 다양한 부처, 아까 말한 농식품부, 환경부, 복지부, 뭐 행안부, 뭐 여러 가지 부처가 이렇게 관련되어 있는데, 사실 마찬가지로 아일랜드 역시도 관련된 부처, 특히 정부 이런 것들이 많이 있을 텐데, 이런 이해관계자들을 어떻게 잘 거버넌스를 유지해서 했는지 먼저 질문을 들어보고 질문에 대한 답을 들어보고 하는 것이 낫겠네요. 통합된 질문보다는. I think this is a very important question. So 간단히 좀 선생님께서 답을 먼저 해주시죠.
Not really, no. In terms of, it's a very good question because it's the question that underpins everything we've been talking about, really. That's how do you do this? It's not academic.
Right.
How do you translate it to reality? And for us, because it wasn't instant, as I was showing on the presentation, this has been an evolution, okay? But there's one key part to all of this, and you said it, the speaker said it himself, which is this has to be driven and led by government. Nothing below that will work. You have to have full government starting. In other words, they will take on board the policy, they will direct it, but within that then you bring the government agencies, the cross-departmental agencies, you bring all of the other stakeholders, you bring the farmers, the cooperatives, but also if you don't have at the highest level a decision, who will tell people, who will tell the ministries, who will tell me, this is your task, this is what I want you to do. And as you point out, everywhere at the start, there's conflict everywhere. That's the nature, naturally, because as you say, a consumer is not a producer, is not an exporter, is not an environmentalist. So you have all of these potential clashes. but you must bring them together under that umbrella where there is a national decision. It is not my discretion or it is not your discretion. You're instructed. This will happen. And then you are put together a framework for that. But the second, having done that, the second critical point is in terms of specific stakeholder groups. But each group comprised of every relevant stakeholder. Nobody should ever be left outside the decision-making process. If you do that, you will not gain harmony or integrity. And also you have to have ministerial leaders across the departments. Now, that's just the principle. I mean, there are a lot of technical, and it takes a long time. But the key for you, in my view, and only my view, is that you must start at government level. However you decide that in your country, that could be a senior ministry, I don't know, or in our case, it was actually our Prime Minister at that time, through Cabinet, took the decision, this is the direction of travel, you must continue and you must deepen and you must make it into a food system, and then you have the Minister for Agriculture, Minister for Environment, and then all of the people underneath that. So, as Secretary General of your ministry. So it's a cascade effect, and that will be different for each country depending on your need. But my feeling is, unless you do that, and then unless the farmers are part of that conversation from the very first day, it won't succeed. You can't succeed because they are the producers. They have to be part of your conversation. How you do that is for you, because you know your own environment and your own sectors better, but you cannot leave them out from day one. So all the partnership must be brought in, and that's what we mean really by the interconnectedness in operation, in effect. So that's just a high-level response from me.
오케이. 지금 위원장님께서는 정부의 이니셔티브를 강조를 하셨고, 특히 아마 하이 레벨, 우리 같으면 이제 뭐 국무회의 중에서도 총리님이 아마 그런 포지셔닝을 잘 해주시는 것 같습니다. 특히 푸드 시스템에 대해서. 역시 이런 것들이 정책이 관련 부처가 참여하는 정책의 경우에는 하이 레벨에 어떠한 있는 것이 굉장히 중요한 거고, 또 하나는 관련된 주체들을 잘 이렇게 참여시켜서 하는 것들이 굉장히 중요하다는 점을 말씀해 주셨기 때문에 우리한테 시사하는 바가 크고, 막 그런 걸 중심으로 해서 우리도 나름대로는 지금 역할을 하고 있는데, 제가 조금 한번 아일랜드가 굉장히 많은 부서가 있을 텐데, 농식품, 여기 나라는 지금 농림해양수산부라고 하는데, 그 부처의 포지셔닝이 좀 어느 정도인지 한번 물어보겠습니다. 우리 위원장님, 그 아일랜드도 굉장히 많은 부처가 있을 텐데, 지금 농림해양수산부는 그 부처의 위치로 보면 하이 레벨에 있어요, 미들 레벨에 있어요, 로우 레벨에 있어요. 부처의 위치가. 지금 농림해양부서의 위치가, 우리 같으면은 한국은 경제부처가 이런 쪽에 버라이어티를 갖고 있는데, 아일랜드에서는 그 농림해양수산부의 위치가 여러 가지 많은 부서 위치 중에 하이냐, 중이냐, 로우냐, 어디가 있는지 한번 간단히 설명해 주세요.
Well, the quick answer to that is agriculture is extremely high level, as you can appreciate. No, on a serious note, it is high level, purely because that is the context and the background. But our Ministry of Agriculture has always been a technical and policy ministry, and that's why it's so strong, because as well as doing policy, it has technicians. John is a veterinary surgeon, I'm an agricultural scientist. And we both do policy and technical, and to some extent, and economists are in our ministry. So that means that we can deliver. In other words, it's not just saying, this is a policy, I wonder who might deliver it. We have the competence, we feel, technically within the ministry, but also, of course, Ministry of Health, which I didn't include as well, are important, as you can imagine. Environment are extremely important. It's not a hierarchy. It's really who comes in together, because a hierarchy immediately changes the dynamic and very difficult.
오케이. 나라는 아마 이게 하이라키를 하기가 굉장히 힘들고, 대외 여건 변화에 따라서 어떤 때는 헬스가, 어떤 때는 뭐 농업이 뭐 이렇게 하는 것 같습니다. 제가 좀 간단히 물어봤고요. 다음은 여러 가지 농업 분야의 이슈가 많이 있겠습니다만은, 서울대학교에서 식품 영양을 전공하기 때문에 주로 이제 소비자 측면에서 하는, 서울대학교에서 생활과학대학 식품영양학과 교수 이렇게 쭉 시작하셔가지고 지속가능발전연구소 환경과도 관련된 연구소 센터장도 맡고 계신 우리 윤지현 교수님께서 또 코멘트를 해주시죠. 네.
감사합니다. 예, 먼저 그 농업에 관련 분야의 이런 큰 행사, 국제적 행사에 이제 식품 영양 분야를 잘 안 부르시는데 네, 이렇게 불러주셔서 감사하고요. 이제 특히 아일랜드 같은 경우는 작년인가에 세계 가정학회를 아일랜드에서 했었습니다. 네, 그래서 인터내셔널 홈 이코노믹 어소시에이션 어셈블리가 이제 여기서 있었는데, 근데 제가 현재 대한가정학회 회장이어서 그때 이제 차기 회장으로 이제 가는 것을 이제 고려했죠. 너무 멀어서 못 갔지만 그때 제가 깜짝 놀란 게 보통 이제 가정학이라던가 농업이라는 분야가 일부 이제 저개발 국가에서 굉장히 중요하게 다뤄지고요. 가정학이나 농학이 같이. 그러나 선진국으로 갈수록 우리 대한민국도 여성가족부를 없애는 논의가 계속 있었듯이 가정학이라던가 이런 농업이라는 분야가 조금 이렇게 도외시되는 경향이 있는데, 아일랜드는 굉장히 다르게 그런 방향성이 다른 나라라는 걸 그때 알았었거든요. 그래서 이렇게 농업의 어떤 분야 전문가 오셔서 또 이런 교류의 기회를 가지게 된 것을 너무 기쁘게 생각합니다. 그리고 또한 식품 영양학 교과서에는 항상 굉장히 가장 먼저 아일랜드가 나오는데, 그 이유는 아까 발표에도 잠깐 말씀하셨듯이 1843년대에
네.
아일랜드 대기근이 있어서 그때 이제 감자를 주로 주식으로 하던, 이제 아시는 분도 있겠지만 감자가 굉장히 전체 주식에서 많은 포션을 차지하고 있었고, 그런데 이제 갑자기 곰팡이 균 때문에 감자가 흉작이 들게 되면서 거의 100만 명이 넘게 당시 아일랜드 국민들이 사망을 하고, 기아 때문에 사망하고, 또 그만큼 많은 숫자가 또 해외로 이주하고 그런 역사가 있어서, 사실은 식품 영양학 분야에서는 또 농업에서뿐만 아니라 우리가 그렇게 많이 생산했다는 거는 국민들이 많이 먹었다는 거잖아요, 당시에. 그래서 푸드 다이버시티를 강조할 때 우리가 다양하게 먹는 게 너무 중요하고, 근데 그러니까 주식도 조금 다양화를 하면서, 근데 다양한 거 안에서도 감자도 그때 유전적으로 한 가지 종에 이제 집중되어 있었기 때문에 그런 폐해가 컸기 때문에 이제 같은 종 안에서도 또 다양한 종, 이런 것들을 강조할 때 저희 식품 영양학 교과서에 엄청나게 많이 나오는 나라지만 처음 뵙게 돼서 반갑습니다. 예. 오늘 이제 푸드 시스템에 대해서 말씀해 주신 자료를 먼저 봤었는데, 사실은 국제적으로는 푸드 시스템이라는 단어가 또 오늘 발표해 주실 때 또 굉장히 중요한 단어로 떠오르지만, 아직까지는 대한민국에서는 어떤 그런 서스테이너블 푸드 시스템이라던가 푸드 시스템 트랜스포메이션이라는 단어가 중요하게 다뤄지고 있지 않은 것 같습니다. 제가 알기로는 농업 분야에서 그런 단어를 제일 많이 제가 그래도 들어본 게 윤동진 원장님으로부터 들었고, 오늘 두 번째로 서진교 원장님으로부터 그런 단어를 들었을 만큼 사실 굉장히 중요한 그런 지속가능 발전에서 굉장히 중요한 부분임에도 불구하고 다뤄지지 않고 있거든요. 그래서 저의 질문은 이러한 것들이 사실은 유럽 전체에서, EU 전체에서 중요하게 다뤄지고 있는 건 압니다만, 이렇게 아일랜드에서도 사실은 서스테이너블 푸드 시스템을 얘기할 때 굉장히 우리가 거꾸로운 부분 중에 하나가 축산 분야잖아요. 축산 분야에서, 그런데 그럼에도 불구하고 또 FAO의 축산소위원회 의장으로도 계심에도 이러한 것이 두 분의 거꾸로운 분야가 있음에도 불구하고 이런 서스테이너블 푸드 시스템 정책이라는 것이 아일랜드에서 이렇게 이야기가 되고 진행이 될 수 있었던 것, 그런 부분에 대해서 조금 여쭙고 싶습니다. 첫 번째는. 그럼 두 번째 질문은 우리나라의 식생활 지침, 푸드 베이스드 다이어터리 가이드라인이라는 게 있습니다. 근데 이게 보건복지부가 주로 만들기 때문에 국민들에게 이렇게 먹어라라고 하는 지침이지만, 사실은 이게 국민들에게 이렇게 먹어라고 하는 지침은 미국 같은 경우는 미국 농무부, USDA가 함께 관여를 해서 국민들에게 이렇게 먹으라라고 만들 때 생산이나 유통 부분을 함께 고려를 해서 지침을 만들거든요. 우리나라에서도 그렇게 해야겠다고 생각을 해서 2015년부터는 농림축산식품부가 함께 하기로 했지만 여전히 보건복지부 중심이고 그 내용에 대해서 제가 2015년에 보건복지부 정책 연구를 했을 때 건강의 가치뿐만 아니라 지속가능성의 가치를 함께 넣은 그 식생활 지침을 만들어야 된다고 주장을 했지만 현재는 아주 미미하게 반영될 뿐 그렇지가 못합니다. 그래서 이런 식생활 지침 측면에서 아일랜드에서는 이런 건강의 측면과 지속 가능성의 측면을 어떤 식으로 조화하고자 하고 있는지 질문 드리고 싶습니다.
네, 그 아까 우리 교수님께서 중요한 질문을 해주셨는데 푸드 비전 2030의 4대 미션이 있습니다. 첫 번째가 아까 말한 대로 기후 스마트, 제가 앞에서 요약하지를 못했습니다만은 그 다음에 회복력 있는 1차 생산자, 이제 세 번째가 식품 안전 영양이고 그 다음에 혁신력, 경쟁력 강화인데 지금 교수님께서 질문하신 것은 식품 안전, 영양에 대해서 지금 위원장님께 질문을 했습니다. 그래서 그 관련된 그 푸드 시스템, 그 아까 제가 나중에 교수님께서 축산 분야는 조금 뭐가 이렇게 이게 매칭이 좀 잘 안 된다고 그랬는데 그 의미를 제가 잘 캐치를 못했는데
지금 전 세계적으로 지속 가능한 다이어트나 지속 가능한 푸드 시스템에서는 현재 전 세계 평균으로 봤을 때 모든 사람들이 현재 먹고 있는 식물성 식품을 2배 정도 먹어야 되고 그다음에 현재 섭취하고 있는 동물성 식품을 반으로 줄여야 된다라는 것이 평균 값으로 제시가 되고 있거든요.
그러니까 우리도 지금 그러면 좀 육류를 좀 줄여야 된다 그런 시각인가요?
근데 관련해서 대한민국 데이터로 제가 이번에 하나 연구를 했는데 대한민국은 많이 안 줄여도 됩니다. 결과를 제가 계산했는데 대한민국은 많이 안 줄여도 됩니다.
오해할까 봐서 또 축산하시는 분들이라든지 누가 얼핏
전 세계적으로는 그런데 지금 FAO에서는 축산소위원회 계시니까 그런 거에 대한 관점이 있으실 것 같아서요.
네. 지금 푸드 시스템과 관련돼서 위원장님 특히 아일랜드의 경우는 굉장히 접근하는 방법이 굉장히 어프로치하고 시스테매틱하게 잘 이렇게 이루어지고 있는데 특히 이제 식품 영양적인 관점에서 푸드 세이프티나 푸드 뉴트리션 이런 것들은 대개 이제 뭐 개도국뿐이 아니라 아일랜드도 굉장히 비중을 두서 접근하고 있는데 이와 같은 아까 말한 대로 푸드 비전에서도 세 번째 중요한 핵심 어젠다로 다루고 있는데 그런 것들을 다루게 된 그 배경이나 그런 것들을 좀 한번 설명해 주시고요. 또 하나는 식생활 지침이라고 그래가지고 한국의 경우에는 지금 교수님께서 많은 노력을 해가지고 아마 식생활 지침이 마련돼서 건강이라든지 뭐 이런 걸 위해서 다
제가 다 한 건 아니고요.
그런 것들을 지금 아마 준비를 해서 하고 있는데 아일랜드의 경우도 그런 식생활 지침 같은 것들이 있어서 소비자들한테 하고 있는 그런 사례가 혹시 있으면 좀 말씀을 해주시길 바랍니다.
Yeah, I think there were 2 questions or 2.5, so
Okay.
I'll quickly answer, but I'd like to answer them maybe if you forgive me, and I think Professor you asked in the context of FAO almost rather than too much for Ireland for the moment. And the first question really that I heard or articulated was almost a conflict between livestock and its environmental credentials and climate and how can this sustainability, in other words, is there not a conflict here? How can you do both of those? And what I can say is in FAO, because we have a subcommittee, and I should better speak to that because I'm the chair, and that is primarily our view is that after Sustainable Development Goals are completely behind. There are, I think, hunger and poverty each year and lack of nutrition is increasing, not decreasing. The population of the world is expanding, and it is the FAO's position that livestock must play a key role in that, both challenge and opportunity. You cannot duck, you cannot avoid your responsibility. And at the moment, we are preparing a global plan of action for the livestock sector that will address all of the issues in relation to production, nutrition, diet, and climate and environment. We're trying to do it in a way that avoids, and you know this any discussion of these things is very combative. It's I win, you lose. And so we're trying to move away from that into, I think, I would use the term, I don't know if you use it, non-binary. In other words, more neutral territory. How can we solve problems here? And we've invited the livestock sector, which is all of us, into the room to say what it can do without prejudice to anybody, but very much following your line. All the way in 2006, livestock in the FAO was completely dominated by its role in climate change, its role in emissions, and there was nothing else. There was a report, and it's a huge report on livestock's long shadow. That has completely changed in the year 2020 when they formed the subcommittee, and now it's finding ways, finding solutions. And we're not talking about production as such, we're talking about, it's a very unwieldy term, but it's called terrestrial animal-sourced foods. In other words, how do they contribute to what we're trying to do, to economic sustainability, nutritional sustainability, protecting the environment. And it links, rather than going too far into that, to your second question, which is food-based dietary guidelines. And really there's two aspects, very briefly. One is in the United Nations, my view, there are attempts to redefine the terms of food-based dietary guidelines to be more inclusive of local and cultural and regional context. In other words, you cannot have the WHO, for instance, say this is a food-based dietary guideline, it applies to everybody. That's not appropriate. Every country, you have the principles of nutrition, and then you must allow for Korean culinary and production and cultural preferences. And you work within that to gain what is appropriate for you and your country in terms of your needs for nutrition and health. It's different for another country, a developing country, maybe doesn't have those products. It can't do that, so they adjust them to be, in that sense, appropriate to that. And I think we're moving away from the absolutist global north view into a much more holistic one. And finally, for us, yes, it's really the Ministry of Health with the Ministry of Agriculture, the primarily Ministry of Health, set the broad terms for dietary guidelines, but they are in such a way they only prescribe excess of what, etc., of meat or excess of saturated fats. You don't tell people what the requirement, you give them the terms of reference, you give them the food pyramids, but you allow people then within that to make their choices. You cannot be prejudicial on all of that. So it's a very eclectic mix at the moment at world level. I hope that's partly what you asked, so my apologies if not.
이게 아일랜드는 우리나라가 지금 한우가 한 340만 두, 이 나라는 거의 690만 두, 700만 두로 아까 말씀드렸습니다. 우리나라보다 굉장히 많은 유구를 해외에 수출해요. 그래서 아마 축산의 비중이 절대적으로 굉장히 중요한 나라이기 때문에 제가 볼 때도 식품 다이어트리 관련돼서 이렇게 제안을 하고 있습니다만 국가마다 식품 소비 패턴이 틀리고 아직 아까 교수님께서 말씀하셨습니다. 우리는 경우에 따라서는 육류를 좀 더 소비해도 우리가 단백질이라든지 여러 밸런스를 맞출 수 있기 때문에 특정국에 이렇게 하기는 아마 쉽지 않을 것 같고 그런 측면에서 포용적이고 또 국가 특정적이고 지역적이고 그런 것들에 대한 설명을 해 주셨습니다. 다음은 우리 윤동진 원장님께서 오셔서 좀 혁신적이고 또 농정원에 대한 여러 가지 일들을 많이 하고 계신데 윤동진 원장님은 OECD에서도 좀 오랫동안 근무하시고 농식품부에서 중요한 부서에서도 이렇게 근무를 많이 하셨기 때문에 오늘 또 이렇게 아일랜드 농정과 관련돼서 혁신적인 것도 있고 또 농정원에 시사하는 바도 있으신데 관련된 내용을 또 코멘트 해주시고 또 질문 있으면 해주시기 바랍니다.
농정원이 일하는 데가 농식품부의 펄러시를 받아서 집행하는 임플리멘테이션하는 인스티튜트이거든요. 그래서 실무적인 질문을 이제 써서 보냈어요. 아일랜드 측에다가 처음에. 그랬더니 여기서 조금 너무 구체적인 질문을 한다. 그래서 조금 해달라고 그래서 제가 그러면 그 질문은 저희가 내년에 아일랜드에 그거를 나름대로 협의하는 그 출장을 갈 겁니다. 그때 그걸 해소하기로 하고 오늘은 조금 이 정책과 관련된 질문을 조금 드리고 싶습니다. 그래서 EU 회원국으로서 아일랜드가 EU가 정한 farm to fork이나 아니면 biodiversity strategy 같은 것들에 기반해서 이제 정책을 해나가는데 EU가 주는 가이드라인이 있거든요. 그러면 그게 내셔널 스테이터들은 이제 그거를 준수하는데 대개는 이제 우리 같으면 그게 최소한 미니멈 수준에서 이제 하려고 하는데 아일랜드도 그런 건지 예를 들면 지금 이제 바이오다이버시티도 그렇고 여기 이제 카본과 관련된 것도 그렇고 환경과 관련된 것들이 모두가 이제 다 자기가 지킬 거 그 한 거만 그 미니멈만 하려고 그럴 텐데 제가 이렇게 발표를 들어봐 보면 여기는 조금 이걸 경쟁력으로 삼아서 가려는 인상을 받았거든요. 그래서 이거를 아일랜드는 그러면 엑스트라 마일을 가는 건지 이제 그런 것들에 대한 것이 우선 궁금하고 관련해서 대개는 이제 그 정책이나 이런 걸 내놓으면 앞에서 하는 얘기하고 실천이 좀 이렇게 갭이 생기기 마련이거든요. 그러면 그거를 EU하고 멤버 스테이트하고 그다음에 실제 파머들이 어떻게 이거를 맞춰가는지 누가 그거를 감시라면 뭐하고 서베일런스나 모니터링을 하고 있는지 이제 요거를 한번 좀 질문하고 싶습니다.
Sense. Coming back to the first, answering in a general term in terms, and you're quite right, of EU in terms of guidelines and the farm to fork, which is you're very well versed. That's very specific in that whole area. Speaking across whether it's let's say standards, whether it's food ingredients, food additives, or whether it's food-based dietary guidelines, all of these pieces. In the broadest sense, that's where probably the most difficult relationship is really between the member state and the European Commission in the European context, rather than with an international. UN isn't as difficult there because EU has a very complex and a very developed system of all across the food spectrum, whether it's food safety in the factory, whether it's food nutrition, whether it's the type of food we produce. And all members always work in such a way to optimise, and you're right, the position for their system within that broader parameter, because while it's difficult and it does require extra cost and extra work by both the administration and the farmers and the organisations, there is actually a market capacity, there's a market win within all of that, because whether you wish to do all that or not doesn't matter. If you're exporting internationally or even within the EU farm to fork or the EU regulations are a very, very powerful market tool. They also give us a huge level of confidence internationally and trust. So within that, we always adhere to that, because that is where the game is at, to use that expression. The related question which leads from that is in terms of surveillance, of control across the board, because it's actually a question that covers both food, both production, both animal security, animal safety, everything. And the ultimate setter of rules is the European Commission, but the actual surveillance, the controls are within the member state. It's the agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture in our case, carries out whether it's food safety in meat factories or whether it's animal identification systems on farm. Any of those, surveillance the same. So it's really a relationship now, except in the case of where we're looking at international surveillance, whether it's in animal health, which John is more familiar with, or whether it's in plant health, that is a compendium of the European Commission and the member state, but using the European Commission's surveillance centres and its reference centres to support what the country does. So you are right in the sense that, look, there's this broader architecture, and the member state works always within that, while at negotiation level, that's what that's about, to set those parameters and to optimise them for the country state within that. But overall, the standards are set at European level, and it's you work within that how to optimise your marketing, your production, and your international, I suppose, exposure. So it's a good thing, and it's also a challenge. I hope that's where you were coming from.
그 제가 스몰 퀘스천 하나만 더 해도 될까요?
예, 그렇게 해주시죠. 예.
그 아까 이제 설명하신 걸 보면 그 그린 오리진이라고 그랬나요? 그 서티피킷, 그린 서티피킷이었나요? 네. 굉장히 사실은 우리 더널이 설명한 거 전체를 이제 포괄하는 여러 스테이크홀더들이 들어와서 그거를 지켜나가는 데 기여를 하는 거라고 저는 이해를 했는데, 근데 그렇다면 아일랜드 시장에서 이 약간의 그 그린 오리지널?
오리진 그린.
오리진 그린?
오리진.
이거를 뛰어넘는, 예를 들면 정부 입장에서는 예를 들면 오르가닉이라는 것들을 또 이렇게 부각을 시키지 않습니까? 그러니까 기존의 컨벤셔널한 거에 좀 더 추가해서 플러스적인 요소를 갖고 있는 오르가닉을 통해서 이걸 이제 변화를 이끌어 나가는데, 제가 그냥 소비자로서 접해보면 그 정도면 그린 그 마크로도 충분하지 않을까 싶은데, 그렇게 된다면 이 축산물에 관한 한 아일랜드는 이 오르가닉이 좀 약할 것 같다는 생각이 들어서 혹시 그게 맞는지 한번 궁금합니다.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, it's first of all, you're quite correct in terms of origin green and what it shows and what we use it for in the marketplace. You're familiar with that. Organic farming is a different, I won't say different maybe, but it's under a different set of rules. A lot of organic production will go through origin green because that's a natural gateway, but the organic production system in Ireland is low, is quite low. Partly because the expense in Europe, organic regulations, they're quite complex. There's a lot of work, a lot of controls involved. And a lot of farmers in Ireland and ourselves feel that while organic production is good and we support it because it's really important as a marketplace showpiece, in a lot of cases we go the route in terms of PGIs, which are geographic indicators, as being a support, if you want, a parallel to organic farming, but has a much more external capacity to it. So if we're selling to you in Korea, you want to see geographic indicator because that gives you a huge cachet in terms of, you know, where this is coming from, what standards it meets. So it's really over and above the organic farming, which is internal. But nonetheless, to finish that question, there's still a huge push domestically to increase the percentage of production from farmland and agriculture. I don't know the figure offhand, but it's low, but to at least double that over the coming years. But really, it's geographic indicators in the livestock are a very strong marketing tool to support Origin Green.
네, 오리진 그린, 아까 시간이 없기 때문에 설명을 충분히 우리 위원장님께서 못 하셨는데, 제가 공부를 해보니까 이 오리진 그린은 국가의 어떤 지속 가능성을 종합적으로 이렇게 추구하는 그러한 아주 굉장히 중요한 시스템인데, 크게 세 가지가 있더라고요. 그러니까 데이터를 과학화하는, 신뢰를 과학화한다 하는 것이 첫 번째고, 두 번째는 농장에서 식탁까지 하나의 팀으로 통합적으로 접근한다. 그리고 세 번째는 착한 농업이 오히려 경제적 가치를 더 높인다 하는 것이기 때문에, 물론 오가닉과 관련된 인증을 직접적으로 연계되기보다는 국가의 어떤 농업 식품 시스템을 어떻게 보면 지속 가능성 있게 유지해서 착한 농업이라는 새로운 가치를 통해서 오히려 경제적 가치를 부과시키는 굉장히 의미 있는 그런 내용을 담고 있는 것 같습니다. 오늘 시간이 많지 않기 때문에 예정된 시간은 조금 지났습니다만 우리가 쉬는 시간도 있고, 그래서 또 우리 존 히긴스 농무 참사관님이 또 참석하셨기 때문에 한번 코멘트 있으면 들어보시고, 또 나중에 플로어에 있으면 또 제가 또 한 가지 넉넉한 질문하고.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, moderator. Just on Ireland itself, we're a country of 5 million people that produces enough food for 30 million people. We export 90% of the food we make to over 180 countries. And the reason we can do that is because we're trusted around the world. And this is something we don't take for granted, but work hard to maintain and to improve. So we make sure we have strong regulations in Ireland for food safety, traceability and transparency. So my department plays a big role in that. The Department of Agriculture making sure farmers follow the rules and all these companies follow the rules, and we apply them really strictly. I can finish up soon.
오케이. 아일랜드가 식품의 어떤 투명성, 그리고 중요한 것이 이제 우리가 모든 식품에 대한 안전성 이런 것들을 철저히 지키면서 하기 때문에 수출에, 아일랜드 하면 수출에 어떤 안전성 이런 신빙성 가진 보증수표처럼 활용되기 때문에 아일랜드가 이렇게 농산물 수출에 어떻게 보면 유럽의 식품 창고와 같은 그러한 기능을 지금 아일랜드가 하고 있는데요. 제가 질문을 위원장님한테, 저는 이제 환경의 전문가이긴 한데 오늘 발표 내용을 보면 2030년까지 아일랜드는 농업 분야에서 온실가스를 30% 줄이겠다는 굉장히 야심적인 발표를 했습니다. 여기에는 경종 분야도 있고 또 축산 분야도 있습니다. 특히 축산 분야는 이 메탄이라든지 이런 쪽의 온실가스를 많이 내기 때문에 아까 뭐 여러 가지 기술을 통해서 메탄을 18% 줄이는 뭐 그런 것도 얘기했습니다만 굉장히 고통스럽습니다. 특히 축산 농가들의 경우에는 경우에 따라서는 네덜란드 같은 경우 보니까 가축 사육두수를 줄이라는 정부의 방침까지 나오는 것이기 때문에 이런 방침이 축산 농가들한테 어떻게 보면 굉장히 상충되고 농가들한테 불만이 될 수 있다고 생각하는데 참고로 한국은 30년까지 농업 분야 온실가스 감축은 27%입니다. 지금 아일랜드는 좀 더 야심적인 목표를 갖고 있는데 굉장히 달성하기 제가 볼 때는 어려운 그런 목표라고 생각하고 있는데 이런 축산 농가와 온실가스 감축으로 위한 정부와 이런 갈등이 있을 텐데 이런 갈등을 어떻게 해결하고 있고 혹시 축산 농가들의 이런 데모나 아니면 이런 것도 꽤 있었을 것 같은데 또 앞으로 경우에 따라서는 가축 사육두수와 같은 감축과 같은 그런 정책도 없지 않아 있을 것 같아요. 네덜란드와 같이. 그런 것들에 대해서 혹시 위원장님께서 갖고 있는 정보가 있으시면 말씀해 주시면 바랍니다.
Yes, I think it's a good point that there's always conflict in terms of environment and how you reach that. And specifically, our reduction target, to put figures on it, because I know you're familiar with it, is to reduce the emissions between 2018 and 2030, I think, by a figure of 5.25 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. So it's a quantified target, and I think, but to answer how we do that, I didn't show a slide because it was further detailed, but we've actually broken down that 5.25 million tonnes target into a suite of specific actions, each of them with the actual figure attached to it. One of them, in terms of, let's say, breeding, which we slowly touched on, will produce 0.15. So that doesn't mean you meet it, but it means you have a path, you have a signpost, and that's how we do it, going through bit by bit by bit. I'm not sure what stage we're at the moment. We're probably slightly behind, but nonetheless, I think we're fairly confident we will make that 5.25 reduction by 2030 because already we have quantified. It's like the AgNav. When you can measure it, you can do it. And really, that's everything has been. We measure it and we quantify, and that has helped us to limit the level of conflict, because naturally a farmer doesn't want to do additional things if we don't pay for it. So it's a mixture of that, of scientific, but also support. You have to help, you have to have financial solidity behind what the farmer is doing, or what's worse, as John alluded to earlier on, a farmer will feel they are taking all of the burden for whatever action it is you're asking, and they feel, right or wrong, that nobody else is. And that always is the problem. For me, that's the nexus and the nub of any problem you have, that one part of society is to say, you'll do it all, nobody else is doing anything. So it's to avoid that. But we have every year, we have a high-level environmental committee under the food vision, specifically, of all stakeholders to monitor the implementation of that reduction that we require. So it's at least while people might have conflict, they're in the room at all times. We're always talking, so there's no kind of thing brewing without being addressed. So that's for the moment where we are, moderator.
여러 가지 말씀을 하셨습니다만은 가축과 관련돼서 종자, 아까 브리딩, 그러니까 브리딩을 잘 이렇게 하면서 저도 이게 구체적인 수치 EBI, what stands for EBI?
It's a very good title. It's an Economic Breeding Index.
그러니까 이게 아마 저도 이 자료를 좀 보니까 경제적으로 브리딩하는, 그러니까 종 갱신을 통해서 경제적으로도 달성하고 카본도 줄이면서 이런 것들을 해가지고 아마 체계적으로 다루는 것 같은데, 우리 이런 것들은 우리가 벤치마킹, 우리는 이런 컨셉이 전혀 없는데요. 그래서 이렇게 꼭 가축 사육두수를 줄이는 것이 이게 아니고 지금 말한 대로 종을 잘 갱신해가지고 온실가스를 적게 줄이는 그러한 것들이 굉장히 중요하고, 이런 쪽으로 좀 앞서가서 나중에 우리 거기 가시면 원장님 방문하시면 이런 걸 좀 와가지고 우리한테 소개해주고 하면 시사하는 바가 클 것 같습니다. 시간은 좀 됐습니다만은 또 플로어에 우리 농정원이나 외부에서 오신 인사분들이 계시기 때문에 한두 분 그래도 좀 질문을 들어보는 것이 괜찮을 것 같은데 코멘트나 질문이나 있으시면 편하게 해주시면 또 위원장님이나 또 뭐 아니면 여기 농무관님 계시기 때문에 질문을 하실 수 있을 것 같습니다. 예, 질문 있으시면 해주시죠. 아주 어렵지 않은 쉬운 질문도 좋고 예, 거기 본인 소개 잠깐 해주시고요. 질문해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
네, 오늘 이렇게 좋은 자리를 마련해 주셔가지고 감사합니다. 저는 이제 뭐 농업에 대해서 정책적이거나 이런 뭐 거시적인 면을 담당하고 있는 사람은 아니고 뭐 사실 다른 직업을 가지고 있습니다. 농업은 이제 부수적으로 하고 있는데요. 제가 농업을 하면서 친환경 농업을 가지고 이제 이야기를 하다 보니까 가장 큰 문제가 저는 이제 미시적으로 이제 접근을 하겠습니다. 잡초 제거, 잡초를 제거하면서 농사를 재야 될지 그냥 재야 될지, 다음 비료를 사용을 안 해야 될지 해야 될지, 다음에 농약을 사용하면서 농사를 재야 되는지 안 사용을 해야 되는지, 이게 방금 이야기한 뭐 카본 제거니 뭐 친환경이니 뭐 이런 거하고 직접적으로 이제 실무선에서 올라간 제가 얘기한 게 리얼리티한 것을 이야기하는 거고, 여기서 지금 이야기하시는 것은 정말 아이디어란 이상적인 이제 이론적인 이런 것을 말씀을 하시는데, 그런 것을 가지고 저희가 농민들이 농사를 지면서 실행을 해야 그 카본도 감소가 되고 탄소도 감소가 될 거 아닙니까? 그런데 그러기 위해서는 제 생각은 이런 정책도 중요한데 우리 농정원이나 이런 데서도 우리가 알기 쉽게 농민들이 받아들이기 쉽게, 예를 들어서 농약을 사용 안 하고 어떤 식으로 지어야 된다, 아니면은 뭐 비료를 사용 안 하고 어떤 식으로 지어야 된다, 잡초를 제거 안 하고 잡초하고 식물을 같이 지으면서 어떤 식으로 지어야 되는가, 그거 뭐 완전 최상적인 방법은 안 나오겠지만은 그래도 어느 정도 접점, 이상적인 방법을 최선으로 제시해가지고 농민들한테 이렇게 주시고 하는 게 실질적인, 여기서 이 포럼을 하고 이런 효과가 밑에서 실무진에서 나타나가지고 반영이 되지 않는가 이렇게 생각을 합니다. 그래서 그런 부분을 참고를 해주시고, 일반 농민 하나에도 그 완벽한 지침은 아니지만 권장사항으로, 또 그게 또 법적인 문제가 또 발생해요. 이렇게 하라 하면은, 그러니까는 권장해가지고 이렇게 했으면 좋겠다는 것을 좀 제시를 해주시면 저희들은 아주 좋은 이런 포럼하고 정책적인 포럼하고 실무전에 의해서 집행하는 게 서로 유기적인 연관관계가 되지 않을까 이런 생각을 해봤습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 친환경 농업인이신가 보죠?
친환경 농업을 지금 하고 있는데 어렵더라고요. 잘 안 돼요.
알겠습니다. 알겠습니다.
예.
현장에서 친환경 농업을 실천하기 위해서 노력하는데 지금 농민의 입장에서 비료를 쓸 거냐 말 거냐, 아니면 제초제를 쓸 거냐 말 거냐 하는 그런 어떤 기술적인 질문을 해주셨는데요. 그와 관련돼서는 오늘 세미나에서 그런 기술적인 답변까지를 다 주기는 쉽지 않을 것 같고요. 혹시 그런 기술적인 지침과 관련돼서 아일랜드도 그런 농가에 대한 어떤 기술 추천이라든지 가이드라인스, 매뉴얼 그런 것들이 있는지 제가 그런 것만 한번 위원장님께 물어보겠습니다. 예, please. Understand my question?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the question. It's really good to hear something from the ground, as it were, from the field. So that's where we start. And the answer is yes, of course there are. And you remind me, 40 years ago, I started my career not in the ministry, but as an extension advisor with the ministry. So I started with questions and answers like that you've given. And you've articulated what is the problem for farmers in a lot of situations. Insufficient guidance and insufficient information as to what everything means. How does this happen at farm level? What is it? What are people asking you to do? And how do you do it? And very simply, without going into details, we can certainly come up with a plan to reduce your level of fertiliser and not have to worry too much about the weeds through good integrated pest management. But in a broader sense, I think in Ireland that is the function, that is the core function of Teagasc, which is the advisory body, is to work with you specifically on all of the rules, all of the process, and develop a farm plan that's relevant to your farm, because you would have an advisor who actually visits you. So you work with him or her on the farm, but much more importantly, that advisor will explain what is happening, why it's happening, rather than leaving you to see, well, how do I do this, how do I do that? You need to be told how to do that and support it so that you yourself can develop the appropriate plan for your farm, but with professional advice. So that's something we do. That's partly why our farming is highly competitive at the moment, because of that. Farmers are not left to do the things by themselves. They're helped and supported professionally. I hope that's of some use to the question you asked.
예, 아일랜드는 현장에서 농민들이 필요로 하는 것들을 자문해주고 아마 컨설팅을 잘 하는 나라로 알고 있는데, 우리나라처럼 무료로 하는 것이 아니라 정부에서 아마 그런 것들을 해주지만 컨설턴트한테 비용을 지불해주면 거기에 맞는 맞춤형 그런 자문을 어드바이저를 잘 해주는 걸로 저는 알고 있습니다. 예, 또 혹시 다른 질문 있으신가요? 질문이 없으시면 예. 국장님 마지막에 하려고 그랬는데 예, 질문 없으면 제가 국장님 질문하시죠. 예.
토론 잘 들었습니다. 질문은 뭐 간단한 질문인데요. 설명해 주신 발표해 주신 내용 중에 아일랜드 사례를 많이 이제 소개해 주는 내용이었는데요. 뭐 내용 중에 장기 계획을 이제 수립하는 것 관련해서 질문을 드리고 싶습니다. 뭐 발표 내용과 전반적인 내용 관련해서 뭐랄까 아일랜드는 새로운 도전과 기회를 잡기 위해서 계속 이렇게 20년 동안 새로운 계획들을 정기적으로 이렇게 만들었는데 그러니까 기본적으로 한국과 아일랜드는 어떤 도전과 기회가 좀 다른 점이 좀 있다고 봅니다. 그러니까 아일랜드는 농산물을 기본적으로 수출하는
그렇죠.
수출 강국으로서 위상을 가지고 있고, 그럼에도 불구하고 많은 도전과 기회를 이렇게 노력해서 계속 변화시키고 있는데 한국은 약간 농산물에 대해서 최근에는 농산물 K푸드 수출을 위해서 많은 노력을 하고 있지만 많은 농산물을 또 수입하고 있는 국가이기도 합니다. 그래서 이런 기본적인 좀 차이가 있는데 이런 뭐 말씀하신 내용 중에 공통적으로 적용되는 어떤 글로벌 트렌드가 있겠지만 좀 차별적으로 적용해야 되거나 우리가 조금 여기 계신 분들이 조금은 고려할 부분이 있는 점도 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 어떤 부분을 조금 공통적으로 이제 보면 좋을 것 같고 어떤 부분을 조금은 그래도 차별적으로 주의 있게 보면 좋을지에 대해서 의견을 좀 주시면 좋겠습니다.
농식품부에서 국제협력을 총괄하는 굉장히 중요한 국장을 맡고 있습니다. 원래 지난주 토요일에 발령을 받았고 오늘 처음으로 미션을 수행하는데 우리 정용호 국장님은 다양한 분야의 정책을 수행했고 아마 해외도 뭐 근무를 하시면서 여러 가지 있는데 핵심적인 질문에
I mean, the question, Director General, is really good because that's really at the core of what we're doing and what you're doing in two different directions almost, but there's similarities there. All I can answer you from our perspective is that we took the decision to focus on what our natural strengths were. We started on that basis where our natural competitive advantage was. We utilised that, but while we say that we export 80% or 90% of our meat-based products, we also import quite a substantial range of products, as any other country does. So we're no different to you in that respect. So the only thing I can say there is in terms of almost deciding for you, where are the areas in your own natural, where have you a natural advantage in the agricultural sphere? What can you build, for instance, through a food system approach that's most readily accepted or easily to introduce, or you have enough stakeholders to develop that. For instance, if you have a natural advantage in some specific productions in terms of food products or food-based ingredients, maybe that's the starting point where you begin to explore how are they produced, what is your advantage in it, how could you put a stakeholder grouping together, does that lend itself to that? In other words, start by this is only my view, by the way, start by going to what you have, where your strengths are, And maybe then at that stage, they will influence how you structure an engagement in a food system, for instance, because you are quite right. Everybody has a different context. So it would be really inappropriate for me to say, this is what you should do. It's not. You take your own and then you apply maybe some of the principles of a food system. How can that be done? And if it's difficult, take a part that will actually work. It's building blocks. If you can get a start, if you get 1 point to build, everything else will come from that. But you have to take great care in identifying that specific area that you can develop, or you lose some of your stakeholders. But if you identify that, I think it's really a good starting point.
네, 국장님이 또 핵심적인 질문까지 해주셨습니다. 그러면은 원장님 마지막 혹시 코멘트 혹시 있으면 하고 제가 그럼 마무리하도록 하겠습니다.
제가 오늘 이렇게 강의원도 듣고 논의를 하면서 제가 생각한 건 그런 겁니다. 글로벌 트렌드라고 얘기하면 대개는 남의 얘기고 우리는 저거하고 거리가 있어 하는데 아일랜드 사례가 주목받는 이유는 글로벌 이제 아일랜드 입장에서 보면 글로벌 그다음에 EU 레벨에서도 있거든요. 정책이 EU, 아일랜드, 그 지역 이것들이 분리되지 않고 같이 돌아간다는 겁니다. 근데 아까 이제 마지막 질문에도 이제 더널이 그렇게 답을 하셨지만 사실은 한국이 여기서 벗어나려고 뭐 노력할 수도 있고 생각할 수도 있지만 사실은 벗어날 수가 없습니다. 이게 이제 시장이 연결돼 있기 때문에 그런 거거든요. 그래서 사실은 이제 우리한테 많은 푸드포스를 주신 거고 그걸 가지고 앞으로 조금 더 우리가 이거를 더 익스플로어를 해나가고 더 이런 것들에 대해서 이렇게 exchange of information이나 knowledge를 하는 것들이 필요하지 않을까 하는 생각을 합니다. 예, 네. 감사합니다.
예, 원장님께서 중요한 또 말씀을 마지막에 해주셨고 제가 오늘 몇 가지 또 토론을 듣고 또 토론 또 발표 이렇게 또 원장님 말씀 플로우에서 말씀 들으면서 몇 가지 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 왜 아일랜드가 앞서갔느냐? 아까 시간은 없어가지고 롤링 시스템이라는 것이에요. 롤링 시스템. 그러니까 아까 얼핏 짧은 시간 말씀하셨습니다만 우리도 하긴 해요. 이런 걸 농식품부한테 얘기하면 우리도 다 하고 있다고 그럽니다. 근데 하고 있는 것이 중요한 게 뭐냐면 어떤 시스템이나 농책이 고정된 것이 아니라 대외 여건 변화에 따라서 순발력 있고 매우 민첩하게 마치 기업에서 하고 있는 것처럼 그렇게 대응하는 것이 롤링 시스템입니다. 하나 그것이 어떤 감으로 하는 것이 아니라 데이터에 기반한 것이고 또 하나 중요한 건 국제적 기준, 글로벌 스탠다드에 맞게끔 노력하는 것입니다. FAO 스탠다드, OECD 스탠다드 이런 국제적인 그러다 보니까 아까 말한 대로 수출의 보증 수표가 되는 것처럼 우리도 지금 K푸드가 현재 우리 지금 90억 거의 100억 달러 국장님 육박하죠, 그죠?
넘었죠.
농업 분야만, 농식품 분야만 지금 100억 달러. 이 나라는 한 180억, 거의 200억 달러 되는 것 같은데 구체적인 수치는 제가 기억을 못 하겠습니다만 우리보다 거의 배 수준 정도의 작은 나라이고 또 물론 그렇지만은 그런 수출을 하는 게 가장 중요한 것은 글로벌 스탠다드에 맞추는 그러한 정책. 가장 중요한 것은 아까 마지막에 국장님이 질문한 것처럼 현장에 답이 있어요. 그러니까 농업이나 농촌의 현장에 문제가 있으면 그걸 해결해서 어드바이저리 해주고 현장 문제를 해결해주는 쪽에 앞서가는 것이 바로 또 그 아일랜드 농정입니다. 그러려면 우리도 이제는 농촌진흥청의 지도가 과거의 패러다임에서는 확 바뀌어서 지금과 같은 그 컨설턴트와 같은 맞춤형 제가 지난주에 농진청에서 그런 세미나가 있었습니다만 농진청이 확 바뀌어야 돼요. 그런 측면에서 보면 과거의 뭐 식량 증산 시대의 그런 지도 기능이 아니라 지금 굉장히 빠른 대외적인 변화에 따라서 그런 쪽으로 해야 되겠다 하는 것을 중요한 것 같습니다. 그래서 우리도 이제는 우리도 매년 뭐 5년, 10년 단위의 이런 정책을 추진합니다만은 대외 여건 변화에 맞게 정책도 변화하고 가장 중요한 것은 이 사람 여기는 보니까 키 퍼포먼스 인디케이터 주요 지표를 둬서 그 지표가 어느 정도 달성하는지 그걸 체크를 하고 또 그걸 또 정책에 보완하고 이런 시스템이 아마 중요한 것 같습니다. 그래서 그런 쪽을 아까 보니까 2030년까지 뭐 메탄 10% 줄이고 암모니아 50% 줄이고 수질 50% 이렇게 하고 농경지 생물 다양성 10% 이런 여러 가지의 구체적인 지표를 통해서 관리하고 또 그걸 정책 달성을 위해서 노력하는 그런 모습들을 보면서 역시 강소농 작지만 또 이렇게 농업의 선진국으로 들어가는 발돋움하고 있고 또 농업 수출에 선도하고 있어서 우리도 이제 K푸드 수출에 의해서 시사하는 바가 큰 것 같습니다. 특히 우리 농정원이 지금 여러 가지 변화를 시도하고 있고 나름대로 하는데 아까 얘기했습니다만은 초그스크, right? 초그스크가 우리 같으면 농식품 개발청이에요. 개발청이기 때문에 is okay? Right. 농식품 개발청이라는 건데 이렇게 정확하라고 그러네요. 그래서 그런 것들 앞으로 뭐 농정원의 역할도 뭐 중요한 건데 어드바이저리 기능도 있고 에듀케이션 기능도 있고 또 여러 가지가 있겠습니다만 그런 교육 기능과 관련돼서 한 단계 업그레이드하고 또 나중에 뭐 아일랜드 방문하셔서 또 그런 기회를 삼는다면 오늘 글로벌 트렌드 첫 번째 시도 또 앞으로 시리즈로 합니까? 원장님께서 이런 시리즈로 하면서 새로운 농업계의 어떤 혁신의 물결을 좀 일으켜 주시면 농업계 전반적으로도 큰 도움이 될 것 같습니다. 오늘 기자분들이 오셨나요? 네. 기자분들이 좀 잘 써주셔서 농업계 이런 시도하는 그런 모습들을 많이 밖으로 알려주셨으면 좋을 것 같습니다. 끝까지 함께 해주신 여러분 감사드리고 당초 계획보다는 한 30분 좀 길어졌는데 질문도 있었고 휴식도 있었고 합니다. 그래서 끝까지 함께 해주신 특히 오늘 멀리서 발표자로 해주시고 또 대사관에서 오시고 또 서진교 원장님, 윤 교수님, 또 원장님 끝까지 함께 해주시고 또 국장님 또 끝까지 참여해 주셔서 좋은 코멘트 해주시고 너무 감사드립니다. 큰 박수로 오늘 마치겠습니다.